Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to be heard in support of our submission. So my name is Steph Rotarangi, and I'm the Principal Rural Fire Officer for the Otago Rural Fire Authority. So collectively, we work closely together with the New Zealand Fire Service to provide fire protection and fire control across Dunedin city boundaries. By way of background, the Otago Rural Fire Authority was established on the 1st of July, and we were set up to deliver the statutory obligations with respect to rural fire for Dunedin City Council and all other councils within Otago, and additionally the Department of Conservation. So the supplementary information that I've handed out is really just some context to why we were formed and who we are and what we do. So rather than going through my submission chapter and verse, I just want to provide a little bit of context around what it is that we're asking for, and obviously answer any questions that you have. So firstly, the Dunedin City Council is a funding member of Otago Rural Fire, and you contribute approximately $220,000 per annum to our operational costs. It's approximately 14% of our annual costs. And look, on behalf of Otago Rural Fire, I just really want to take the opportunity to thank you for that contribution, and just ask that you continue to support effective fire control in your region by funding our operational costs, as will be agreed with your officers. So in our first 9 months of operations, we've had around 830 incidents in Otago. And while Dunedin City is the smallest of our rural areas, you are our largest workload. So 30% of these calls approximately has been within your boundaries. If you compare this with the likes of Central Otago, who we often think is the rural fire risk, they contribute less than 20% of our calls. So just like everything that you're hearing today, I just want you to think about rural fire as a daily event. So every day in Dunedin, someone is being deployed, some volunteer, to a fire in the rural zone on average. Our experience certainly mirrors the last 5 years of fire statistics throughout Dunedin, where you've consistently had our highest number of calls, our highest cost of suppression, and the largest area burnt throughout Otago. Now, this is just really a reflection of this is where the population lives, but also you have a very high urban-rural interface, which is important to defend, and also you have some hill country and the associated risks with the climate zones such as the Strathtyre. So look, I can confidently sit here today and tell you that Dunedin City Council officers are working really closely together with Otago Rural Fire. And by way of illustration, your officers have recently agreed to an out-of-cycle grant to purchase one new fire appliance for the rural sector. And again, I want to take the opportunity to thank everybody for their prompt attention to that matter, because this really does address a significant gap that was in Dunedin's fleet. So it's huge progress, and thank you for that. However, we still have a slight issue with the housing of equipment and our volunteers. And in particular, there's two areas. The Wakawaiti tanker is basically located slightly off-site from the Volunteer Fire Brigade in a shared depot with the Wakawaiti Drama Society. You know, while this site is covered and secure, it's great for our tanker, but it does lead to some delays in the deployment of equipment. So our Wakawaiti volunteers need to go to their fire station to get their call information, get their gear on, figure out who's driving the tanker, because not everyone can drive a tanker, and then deploy off-site. And our tanker takes a few minutes to warm up as well. So it's just really not effective fire control. And therefore I'm asking you to consider $30,000 to build an extension at the Volunteer Fire Brigade, which means our tanker can be housed on site. It's also significant for us because we can share toilet facilities and training rooms and gear with the New Zealand Fire Service. The second amount of money that I was asking for was to create a depot for your Wakari Rural Fire Force, which is your only rural fire force within Dunedin. Look, subsequent to this submission, I've had the chance to work a little bit more closely with your officers, and I believe we can come up with a much more cost-effective solution to this matter. So I just want you to table that we're working on housing, but at this stage withdraw the need for that money out of all the things that you'll be hearing today. So just to summarise, I'm asking that you consider a one-off capital grant of around $30,000 to provide the necessary housing of rural fire equipment in your region. Finally, in November 2014, all the previous rural fire authorities, so the councils in Otago, they resolved to transfer their plant and equipment to us on the basis that Otago Rural Fire would maintain, replace any rural fire equipment throughout the region. And it needs to be noted that at that time we discussed that there had to be some further discussions around the funding of this. So no funded depreciation reserves were passed over with that decision. And what I'm really here to ask is that if the Dunedin City Council does have any funded depreciation reserves associated with rural fire, that you consider passing that on to Otago Rural Fire as well, so that we can actually effectively maintain a capital replacement budget. We can't inherit a fleet that's 20 years old and effectively replace that on an annual budget. It would just take us too much time. So that question has been asked of all councils to consider their fleet and any depreciation reserves coming over to ORFA as well. Look, I can also confidently say that once we've reached that baseline, we have everything that we need to make any further or planned replacements across the region. And I just want to take the opportunity to again thank you for your support. We're a new authority. We've had a high level of support from Dunedin City Council, and we look forward to working together in the future to reduce the impact of fire. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Questions, Councillor?
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. I have a question in relation to the additional information you've handed out, that being the contribution of founding members. Is that our annual contribution?
Yes, it is. So that's your contribution to our annual operating costs.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a portion in there that we set aside for funding depreciation and capital replacement, but it's just an annual cost.
Yeah, no, I understand that. The reason I ask, and far be it from me to be advocating that we spend more money when perhaps we don't have to, but it seems a little bit out of step to me that we have a large population and we have a large number of call-outs, but we are the lowest funding member of this authority.
Yeah.
How did it get worked out this way?
So that's a really good question, and it's certainly not the first time that those inputs have been raised. However, it was decided in our first 3 years that we would operate on what we call a status quo budget. So whatever Dunedin City Council was putting into rural fire previously, they put into us. But one of the jobs that I have to work very closely with your chief executives and mayoral forums over the next 6 months is to come up with a long-term funding model. And that will be based on aspects such as sharing fixed costs, but also the risk of your region. And we're still working through that process, but the 220,000 was pretty much based on whatever was spent on rural fire before.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Calvert.
Just wondering where the insurance people come in with the funding things, because it's their risk where you're reducing, isn't it? Sort of, it's part of what you're doing is reducing the cost too.
Exactly. So the New Zealand Fire Service, so there's a fire levy on insurance, and the bulk of that goes to the New Zealand Fire Service, but rural gets a portion of it. So where that money goes from the insurance companies is to a national body, and I can apply to them for grants to fund equipment within Dunedin. So for example, at the moment, it's normally about 50-50, but sometimes they'll fund it up to 2/3. So we do have access to that money, but it's more for the purchase of personal protective gear and equipment to service a region. The statutory obligations of rural fire rural fire control has always stayed with councils. So we do have access to some of that insurance money, but not to the same extent that the New Zealand Fire Service does.
So is that an urban versus rural thing that's going on there? So they're mostly funding urban fires.
Exactly.
Not funding fires, but funding.
Exactly, no.
Response to urban fires.
Exactly, yeah.
Councillor New.
Thank you, Worship. Steph, with regards to the request for the 30k to house the tanker on site with the appliances, can I just ask how often would the tanker be called out to an event at the same time as the appliance?
Yeah, so there's been 62 call-outs over the last 5 years. So it's not a huge call-out rate, but it certainly is only going to increase because traditionally there was a boundary between yourselves and Waitaki District Council, whereas those boundaries have dropped now. So we have been deploying Wakawaiti's tanker further, and as you'll probably know, we don't have a tanker in Palmerston at the moment. So it's approximately, let's just say, 60 calls over the last 5 years.
And the breakdown, sorry, you may not have this figure, but the breakdown when the tanker is actually called out right from when the appliance is called out, when the appliance leaves the station, often the tanker isn't heading out at the same time.
No.
It's often not required. So I was just trying to understand the stats to break down all total call-outs versus call-outs with the appliance and the tanker.
Sure. So the figure that I'm referring to is when the tanker goes with the appliance, and I'll be happy to send you those figures. I can't remember them off the top of my head as to when the appliance deploys without it. I should also say that those figures are only for the rural zone, so sometimes the tanker will come and support the urban district.
Councillor Lord.
Stephanie, I noticed the original figure, like we're putting in a lesser figure. Those figures are based on our historic spend. Does that mean that the figures you've provided about us being the most work, that's just in the first 9 months, or that's a historical fact?
So the figures, the 30% of our calls is from our experience, but that certainly mirrors the last 5 years, which is as far back as I went back.
To change dramatically?
No.
And the question I would have to ask, or almost be complimentary of the DCC, if they could fight more fires for less money, does that mean we had a more efficient service before? And when this was sold, this rural Otago-wide amalgamation, it was that we would get a better service and a more efficient service. And so the question is there room in the other areas of Otago, rather than see us paying more in the future, actually saving them money, bringing them down to a more efficient level?
So I can answer that one at a time. The first question is how did you sort of respond previously? And the honest answer to that is you've relied very heavily on your surrounding neighbours in the event of a fire. So whether it be Clutha District, Waitaki District or Central Otago District, and we have all this sort of stats to prove that. So again, that's what Otago Rural Fire Authority is all about as well, is not duplicating resources and cutting down these boundaries and making sure rural fire is managed effectively, for sure. However, a status quo budget didn't mean it was right and didn't mean it was effective. If we talk about the efficiencies that we've been able to gain, we've certainly shown that we have had a decrease in our administration costs. So we are finding those economies of scale throughout Otago. We've certainly had a decrease in some of our operating costs, but we've had a big increase in the cost of compliance and the cost of training. And I've forgotten if there was another question in there, sorry. Yep, cool.
Councillor Thompson.
Just as a kind of a matter of process, I get the difficulty that you've got, which is that the operational funding has been transferred over, but you don't have a capital base. Whilst I will check around your question on the depreciation reserve, I'm pretty confident that there isn't one. But it does seem to me that if that's an issue, it's an issue for the authority, and I wonder, would it not be more appropriate for the authority itself to be saying to its constituent members, we have this problem and we've identified that the following capital expenditure gaps are necessary. On the blank, people say I've been like that for a long time. And do it that way rather than coming to the place of origin of where the need is.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and just bear with me as I try to answer it. So the founding members made it very clear when the authority was put together that they did not want to fund neighbouring authorities to meet what I'll call a minimum standard, which is the absolute basics of firefighting. So what we're talking about here is all of our vehicles being safe to drive. That's not an issue in Dunedin City, by the way. all of our equipment being housed and there being enough water to service the region. So we have discussed this over the last 9 months with our stakeholder committee, of which you represented, and we felt that that was the level that we needed to be to succeed. So we're not asking for much, dare I say, we're just asking for those 3 basic minimum standards to be met. And it was agreed that when it comes to those minimum standards that we would go back to the founding members and ask them to bring us up to that level. Look, the challenges aren't huge in rural fire. It's not a great deal of infrastructure that we need. And once we reach that minimum standard, with the collective contributions that we have, we feel we can run a very effective business and make the improvements that were asked of us. But we have to get to a level of which we can achieve.
Oh, thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, just coming to the question of the incidents in Otago, and especially in Dunedin, and the scary lot of red dots in this one here on this page. But I wondered if you could just give us an idea of that, what's driving that incidence, that high incidence.
Sure. So it's pretty well researched that people start fires mostly. I mean, we do have lightning strikes and things like that, but certainly it's where the population is that the fires are caused. Sorry guys, it's certainly where the population is, but you have some complicating factors as well. You have a lot of forestry around you. You have a really interesting climatic zone. So, you know, there's some big differences from coastal Otago to inland Otago. But certainly, if I could be blunt and short and to the point, it's the people. That's the number of fires. Exactly. When it comes to the cost of suppression and the equipment that we need, a huge factor in that is to do with the fact that you have people on an urban-rural interface. If you think about 3 Mile Hill, for example, you know, that's a rural zone, but it would be we just have no room to defend. Whereas in the likes of Central Otago, we could potentially let a grass fire and catch it at the next ridge. But yeah, so there's a number of factors there, but the 2 most important ones is population and where your people are living.
Councillor Hall. You were saying your training costs have gone up. Is that because you don't train in Dunedin now? Do you have to go to Christchurch to train the same as the fire service, or you still train locally?
No, absolutely not at all. Our training costs have gone up because we estimate that there was a significant underinvestment in training throughout Otago. And this is not strictly a criticism, this is just human nature. So everybody knew that the authority was coming. It took 3 years to merge. People really stopped investing to wait and see what we would do, if I could be very short about it. And so we estimate that approximately 25% of our volunteers didn't even have the basic training to enter a fire ground. So our cost of training's gone up because we have to catch up. But all of Otago's training is done in-house. We do get contractors where manpower can't be provided. Thank you.
Can I say that you give us considerable confidence that the Otago Rural Fire Service is operating really well? So thank you.
George, my name is Steve Butler. I'm a council member of the Royal Astronomical Society of New Zealand. I'm leader of the Dark Skies group of that society. Sometimes we call the gorilla arm of the Royal Astronomical Society. So my interest in particular is around light pollution. We have a vested interest in sort of natural light coming into the earth and studying that. So I'm not going to talk directly to our submissions, that will stand on its own, but I've just provided just a little bit of an overview that I'd like to try and challenge the traditional thinking around street lighting and also outdoor lighting. So just looking at the Resource Management Act, it sort of spells out the intrinsic values related to ecosystems. And in particular, the B paragraph there, which is the essential characteristics that determine an ecosystem's integrity, form, functioning and resilience. And I've put the comment in there that planet Earth is the most important ecosystem we have. And so what I'm trying to do is sort of lift the thinking away from a technical aspect of just providing street lighting to set standards and that sort of thing. So the first diagram at the top there is just to try and give an indication of the sort of the natural light cycles that we're exposed to, and sort of going from around midday to the left of the diagram, the sunlight fades down to twilight, and then we go into the night period, which is the moon, quarter moon, full starry night, and into full darkness. So there's a natural progression there that's been going on for sort of millions of years. Just a comment there that the sky is blue in the daytime because of a phenomenon where the blue component of the sunlight is scattered in the atmosphere. So it's the blue end of the spectrum is short wavelength and high energy. It interacts with aerosols in the atmosphere more readily than the longer wavelengths, and so it scatters as it comes in, and there's your blue sky. But that forms quite a strong signal for basically all of the life on this planet. So ourselves and circadian rhythms, and right down to trees, insects, animals, all trigger around the natural light cycle on Earth. It causes quite a problem for astronomers in that the sky is essentially opaque during the day, so we don't get a view of the universe. So the message essentially is that when we move our technologies into whiter and brighter lighting, that contains a higher proportion of blue and green part of the spectrum, which again scatters more predominantly in the atmosphere and gives us an opaque sky at night. The second diagram there, which is, I'm sorry it hasn't really printed out as well as I'd hoped, it's certainly a lot clearer on my screen at home. So essentially it's trying to introduce the concept of correlated colour temperature of light. And so the lower the number of that figure, which is to the left, is about 2,000 degrees Kelvin, right through to 9,000 degrees Kelvin at the blue end of that diagram. Full moon sits at about 4,000 Kelvin. And below that, which is not particularly clear, I've tried to compare artificial lighting technologies with that sort of natural extent of light. Further down is the interesting comparison for us as astronomers, in that on the left-hand side of that diagram is the various lighting technologies that we have. The traditional light, low-pressure sodium, the second one is high-pressure sodium, filtered LEDs, and then what has become known as warm white LEDs, medium white LEDs, and then blue-white LEDs above that. So if you can look at the spectrums that are produced there, you will see that the low-pressure sodium is quite a narrow part of the overall spectrum. And so for astronomers it's much easier to filter out, and leaves quite a dark part of the spectrum for us to capture imagery from outer space. The high-pressure sodium, which has become more predominant, is a bit wider, and then we get into filtered LEDs, which introduces a whole green part of the spectrum. And then further into the warm white and the white LEDs get into that blue component of the spectrum. And that's what we're starting to see now with the introduction of LEDs, is that the lighting predominantly has shifted from a yellow-orange type light around the streets to becoming a much whiter form of lighting. And that's the problem for us. So what my contention, or what our contention would be, is that light including the lack of light, so nighttime, is an essential characteristic that determines our ecosystem's integrity, form, functioning and resilience. And I've attached or delivered a couple of documents there which are reasonably, well, they're very recent. The communications one, titled LED Lighting Increases the Ecological Impact of Light Pollution, is a paper produced last year by Scion, which is a Crown Research Institute in New Zealand for forestry production, and they are raising the issue of basically contamination of timber products because of the introduction of green and white LEDs in particular, so green-blue into the production. And so their conclusion is that we should be, a comprehensive assessment of overall impacts and knowledge about the influence of each region of the visual spectrum will allow technologists to work with ecologists to focus future developments in lighting technology that balances the need of illumination with reduced ecological impact. So that's just a flag, and I'm aware that the Dunedin City Council are pretty strong forest investors, something to think about. So the second paper, which just came out last month, is published by the Royal Society. Nighttime lighting alters the composition of marine epifaunal communities. And essentially they're saying that introduction of white LEDs around harbours, coastal areas and things is having an impact on unwanted life in those harbour areas, including fouling of ships, mussel farms, sort of predominance or attraction of sea squirts, which are quite unwanted in your harbour. So that is just another couple of flags to suggest to council that if you are embarking on a major shift to LEDs, that there are bigger things to be concerned about, and just asking that you raise your awareness before you commit wholeheartedly to an introduction to white LEDs. I have heard a couple of comments recently that the city have a plan to become the first dark sky city, perhaps in New Zealand or the world. Now, I'm not sure if you folk have been told yet, but so okay. So one of my other hats is that I'm on the Aoraki Mackenzie International Dark Sky Reserve Management Board. So I've got a wee bit of background to that. What I'd like to do, I've only brought one copy of each of these, is just leave that with council, that there's the guidelines for an international dark sky community. And another one here, which is just a brief overview of starlight cities and municipalities, which is from a covenant of mayors in Europe, and that's a UNESCO Man and Biosphere program. So I'll leave those with you, and just one of our little brochures from the Aoraki Mackenzie. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve, questions, Councillor Calvert.
Do you have a position on shielding light? I mean, I'm getting from what you're saying that we don't want to light the trees or the fish or the water or the sky, but presumably if we could light the footpaths and the roads, that wouldn't be a problem to you because they're not very ecological in their own wee way. So would that shielding the light to make sure it's going where we want it to go and less than the parts we don't want it to go, would that be?
I would. What I haven't touched on there is that we are part of the ecosystem as well, and that white lighting at night is implicated with quite a range of health issues, particularly cancers, diabetes, obesity, depression, and that comes from the disruption of the circadian rhythm within ourselves, and that we have evolved over many years for a bright daytime period and a dark nighttime period, and our circadian rhythm has worked through, aligned with that process, so that in the dark time of night is the only period that our bodies produce a hormone called melatonin. Exposure to light, even if you're asleep, I'm told, suppresses that production of melatonin. And so the melatonin is a hormone that helps combat certain malignant cells, particularly breast cancer and prostate cancer. So the breast cancer one was picked up through night shift nurses having about an 86% higher rate of breast cancer than their day shift compatriots.
So that's not sort of street lighting unless we're going to sleep on the streets, sort of.
No. So what that does is that if you're exposed to bright blue light in the evening, through if you're walking home after the movies or something like that, what it does is suppresses that formation of melatonin for about 2 to 3 hours after that exposure. So if you go home, go to bed, then your melatonin's not starting to produce until about 2 o'clock in the morning. Sunrise maybe between 6 and 8 in the morning. You shorten up that period of melatonin production. So normally melatonin would start to kick in at about 10 o'clock on an average winter night.
Councillor Wilson. Oh, right. Councillor Peake.
Thanks, Steve. I'm just wondering if, and noting your involvement with the Tekapo project, the Dark Sky there, whether there are any lessons for us from the Tekapo township in terms of the way they light their streets and houses and so on.
Yeah, certainly. And I think as well as Tekapo have done, they started their process nearly 30 years ago in terms of the legislation, the lighting rules. So they've done exceedingly well with the technologies that were available to them at that time. But the strength of their rules were to remove the blue component of light, and that's to do with the observatory on the top of Mount John. So predominantly their lighting is low pressure sodium around the streets, although some white light has come in. Does that help, or have you got a specific?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we had from Ian Griffin this morning a request to set up a panel that would advise our staff as to the best forms of lighting for our streets that would have the least impact on night sky. There's
certainly plenty of that information available overseas. Europe are really leading the way. The IDA, the International Dark Sky Association, have got model lighting ordinances. It's interesting that the New Zealand Transport Agency came out with a lighting guideline last year, and one of their recommendations is that all lighting must comply with the guidelines of the International Dark Sky Association. Right. So there's a lead there.
I think Ian mentioned Tucson as being an example.
Yes.
Do you have any others?
There's becoming quite a few. Paris, the whole of France have brought in lighting restrictions so that at dusk or in early evening, outdoor lighting, like veranda lighting and things should be turned off. Building lighting and empty buildings should be turned off. And that started in Paris and is now right across the country. So it's definitely happening.
Is that for power saving measures or for night sky protection?
Paris, a bit of both. Paris have a very strong tradition in quality lighting, which has sort of fallen away over recent times, but I think probably it's fair to say that energy saving would be a major part of it.
Thank you.
So in short, Steve, what you're saying is that the lighting, getting the right light colour is important, not for both dark sky and for the environment that we live in.
Correct.
So it's the same colour that's better for both.
Generally correct. There's some difficulty comes with the impact on bird species. So your coastal areas, there are some colours that attract birds and some that don't. So typically red lighting at night would have very little impact on us, but has been found to attract bird life. The oil rigs in the North Sea have converted their outdoor deck lighting to a green coloured light, and so the marine birds that were migrating past them no longer come in and fly around the drills and crash into this.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for your submission.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
Just one little thing here, I'll just show you. We now have a device which will measure the sky quality of the sky. So the Royal Astronomical Society have just purchased 23 of these for each of the affiliated societies around the country. So we will shortly be starting to monitor the skies throughout the country. It's a very simple process, just press the button and a number will come up. So it's very bright in here, obviously. That number in Tekapo is up around 20, and so it's measured in magnitudes per square arc second of the sky, so it's making an assessment of the sky. Just a little plug. Thank you very much. Yes. And talking.
Lala Fraser.
Right, you're not going to be feeling very positive when I appear before you standing representing STOP and asking you for more staff. And I know that your executive officer over there was laughing because she's already told me quite strongly that, or she's told us quite strongly that the councillors do not want more staff, they want them decreased. But I guess that what we're saying is that there are two areas that we think that you definitely need more staff. One of them might be helped with only one staff member, but the other one, we think you need more than one compliance officer. The city approves a number of resource consents every year, and unfortunately the number of compliance officers you have means that there's no way that you could ever monitor all those conditions. I know from attending consents here that the councillors take their job very, very seriously, and they do think very strongly about what conditions should be placed on every resource consent. And there are very thoughtful and often difficult decisions made over those, so that the conditions that are placed on resource consents are not done lightly. And they're not done just for the sake of having another condition. But what's happening now, we see, is that because of the lack of compliance officers, these are not being monitored adequately, and in particular, we're concerned about landscape issues and environmental conditions that are being placed on certain consents, but then are being flouted or accidentally or otherwise overlooked, and it unfortunately often these things can go on until it becomes a point of no return, or that you can no longer save that particular landscape or return it to its natural condition, or if in fact the landscapes are the landscape conditions are designed to protect a particular outstanding landscape from the activity that's going on. If that goes on for too long, then it's very difficult to
reinstate it. Both landscapes and environment and our environment, finite things, and it's very easy to go over the tipping edge when you say, oh well, we've already spoilt that landscape, or we've already lost that wetland, so we won't bother ensuring that that condition is placed on the next consent that comes up, or we won't ensure that that particular consent holder is forced to take this seriously. So we would ask you very seriously to look at the number of compliance officers you have. It's a bit like health and safety staff. It's only when you have major accidents and people realise that they reduced the staff to a point where they were no longer effective that you actually do something about it. And the other suggestion that we would like to see, you had a biodiversity officer who was only part-time. She was a planner, she was not an ecologist. But effectively we've asked every year for you to consider having a biodiversity officer who works across all departments in the same way that that person did when she was developing the DCC's biodiversity policy. But this is also important because the city has areas of significant conservation value that it has in its district plan, ASCVs. And each of those ASCVs has to have a management plan. Often it comes under the QE2 covenant conditions, and you would expect them to be monitoring that management plan, or it comes under Department of Conservation, and you'd expect them to be monitoring that. But there are some that have that owners, private landowners, have agreed to that effectively have nobody monitoring whether in fact those conditions are still being maintained and whether it is remaining or improving as an area of significant conservation value. Essentially, Stop Now has nobody to go to. When we see things that concern us, there's nobody within council that we can say, oh, okay, well, we'll go and see this biodiversity officer or this ecologist or whatever. And these are not things that you can call in consultants on always. So I'm talking about an ongoing thing. This person could perhaps then put up the flag and say, yes, let's have a consultant on this particular problem. But we would like to see the council look at reinstating the biodiversity position and having a suitably qualified ecologist holding that position. Thank you.
Thank you, Lala. Questions, councillors? Councillor McTavish.
Thanks, Lala. My question is just in relation, you've been interfacing with council for a number of years now. Would it be fair to say that historically there has also been greater ecological expertise in the Parks and Rec division than is currently the case? I'm thinking of people like Renee Gordon and those who were there previously, and there is now fewer of those people involved.
I would say that is true, yes. Sometimes that expertise did come through some of the Parks and Gardens staff, but again, the people seem to leave and they're not replaced with somebody with similar expertise.
Yeah, Lola, I was just interested with your no to road widening on the peninsula in parts. I was under the impression that the idea of reclamation was to reinstate beaches where beaches would be moved. Is that not quite right?
Yes, I didn't choose to speak to that, and I'm aware that even amongst people that live on the peninsula and are keen on conservation, they don't always agree with STOP's view on this. But we don't really want to see, but they do agree that they don't want a highway. They don't want to lose those apple trees and those rock formations and so on, which are part of that road at the moment. And we are suggesting that in order to keep the bird feeding areas and the fish feeding areas, that it can be done in some of the areas. You won't have a super duper highway for cyclists, but you will still have an adequate walking and cycling area on the sides of the road. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sort of does. I was more meaning in terms of reclamation. I thought there was areas where at low tide, for example, there might be 8 metres from the harbour wall to the water. I thought that was going to be reinstated by putting more rock out and creating new beaches. So I'm not sure where the loss is, but
that's where that's why we suggest that by starting in the city and working towards Mac Bay, you've got more of those areas. Of particular concern to us are the intertidal areas that are soft sand and are important bird feeding and fish spawning areas.
Thanks. Just following the theme of the loss of intertidal rocky shore, which is mostly what it is rather than the mud flats or so on, in terms of the reclamation for road widening. Would you think
can I just interrupt you there, Valerie, because I don't think that's altogether true. If you consider the area, for instance, between Broad Bay and Portobello, because of the width of the road widening, you're losing a lot of these little soft, sandy, bayed areas. So,
yeah, that may be true.
I'm sorry, that's right.
I'm just wondering whether the question is whether there's a scope, in your view, to not. I mean, Councillor Lord's talking about the intention to recreate beaches like rocky shores in the intertidal zone, very difficult to do, but to whether to actually create artificial reefs out in the as a way of replacing all that habitat. Can you see that as a possibility?
Yes, as long as you're talking about birds that perch, but it's not going to help the birds that are actually feeding in that soft area in general.
Okay.
Lara, thank you for your submission. Appreciate it. Jared Little. Welcome, Jared. The next 5 minutes are for you to use as you will.
Thank you. I'm going to highlight some things from my submission and gloss over others. I want to make a statement about the general framework, which is transport economics here, which is quite important. It's unifying for quite a lot of council responsibilities, even Mosgiel and South Dunedin, for instance. The first picture may seem irrelevant, even inflammatory, in fact. We were going up Shortcut Road and a clattering sound, a drift trike came roaring around the corner and a whole queue of them behind. So, but rather than feeling outraged, we actually looked back to our own youth and carts and thought this is brilliant. So we're seeing people use alternatives, whole row of people with scooters at the pool, students going down George Street on their skateboards across campus, along the corridors and into lectures. The new way of moving. It goes to the heart of transport economics. It asks the question, what are our roads for? and especially in Dunedin, when we can look back at Princess Street that had such multifarious uses when it was created. In other countries, roads are being returned to their multifarious uses. They're not just corridors for us to drive safely in cars. Now, there are big distortions in New Zealand. We have large road subsidies. The changes in 2009, the Independent Review Panel pointed out that our road user charging system was, in fact, a bit like a flat earth system. They recommend they retained the power, which we don't, and that distorts our funding fundamentally. We haven't worked out how big that is. We just get the receiving end of it. The other thing is we have no quality life years in our calculations, no capital value for real estate, etc., which affects parking. And also the big thing, as they said, the peer reviews of our policy, and the Australian mediators as well, we're using outdated annual motor licence fees, the base for which is unknown, and they need to be replaced. Now there's a movement towards technology-facilitated direct road charging, and below I showed the Google car, because that's coming inside 10 years, maybe 5 years, and that will change the way we fund our transport and view it, and that has large implications for the DCC development and transport. We have opportunities here, of course, because we have all the expertise in GIS and so on to be involved in being a Google car lab. So we're talking about compact cities, economic agglomeration, and a counterpull to Auckland. I want to just mention a couple of things about the proposal for the road corridor, for the rail corridor, cycle rail. I think that stands out as the most exciting link we've got. It goes between the heart of South Dunedin and North Dunedin. It can be made pleasant and attractive, and my subsidiary pictures highlight the opportunities for ramps on and off, the ability to cross Anderson Street. At the moment, the proposal to go up Vogel Street requires detours that will be artificial. This would be a real heart of our transport scheme, coupled with an underpass at Queen's Gardens. The new underpass at Clyde has come in at 500,000, which is a fraction of our 2 million. The underpasses at Wellington, right by the harbour side, are used by very heavy foot traffic, and we're in a similar situation here. That would link us from the gardens and that CBD area across, which is a crucial obstruction for our road transport network. I suspect that no matter what we do with a bridge there, the Anzac-St Andrews intersection will remain important for cyclists because there's no elevation involved. And that rearrangement of Anzac Avenue must cater for the cycling. I'll put a compromise which takes some ideas from the Dutch planning and adjusts the plans for the intersection to allow cyclists to have a reasonable traverse of that at minimal cost. The tunnels, I think they're just a standout, a strategic links in the great Otago vision for Otago-wide cycling, and also for utility in Mosgiel. The specific point here is about sit-downs. We have very steep streets. I give a picture there of Warrender Street, very dangerous place to cycle up. Uphill cycling on footpaths could easily be allowed in Dunedin. We have Stewart Street, Ratway Street, which are appalling for cycling uphill. Be no problem to cyclists, to pedestrians if a cyclist was crawling up there, and set-downs there are opportunities we could use very productively. There are also a number of easy links we could emphasise in our cycle network. For instance, McLagan Street, perfect way to go up the hill. There's no cycle lane there or accommodation on that difficult corner. Also, as alternative around the harbour, I highlight the Wharf Street, Strathallan Road, Taki Street alternative. In fact, I just passed a woman cycling along there. I show pictures of the roadway, merely cutting the grass there to improve the utility. But that's a very low-cost alternative or addition to our network that we could exploit. Then there's the links from the Leith Street from Anzac Avenue, which how many people have highlighted, going through the Leith Street from the Anzac Avenue, St Andrew Street intersection to campus. So there are things like that we can get very, very cheaply and easily to augment the network. Of course, South Dunedin, we must get away of getting along Victoria Street. It's ridiculous that we don't have a way along there. It's very dangerous at the moment, and same with Forbury Street. George Street and Princess Street, I've been involved in the very well-run workshops that you've had on the development there, in which we've got a large amount of support for changing that space. I attached pictures of Blenheim, of all places, which has created a mixed mall with a small corridor for vehicles in the middle. The idea of getting parking in George Street as you just cruise past is not very realistic, but I do support supplying parking so we can consolidate the value of the activity on George Street. So, Parking is a number one issue which comes up all over the place. That's at the heart of the transport economics. We have no real estate charge, no congestion charges. With GPS, that will change. We'll revisit that whole question, rationalise it. And that's a problem which obstructs us doing many things around the city, and that's out of proportion to the economic values that we attach to it and could be served much better. We do have no master plan for active transport. There are critical links needed that you can see all around the edges of the suburbs, suburban loops, for instance, are missing. Another problem is we don't have an overarching policy in terms of our development. There are a number of cul-de-sac developments, which I highlight here in pictures, going ahead right now. And I supplied to you the one of the High Cliff development, which effectively precludes us having our integrated walkway that Doc talked about along the beach, that area, that esplanade. You can see how the subdivisions have been laid out in a way which is virtually unserviceable by ordinary or other alternative means of transport, even public transport, and you cut off the natural ways of access. There needs to be an overarching policy on those developments. The Mission Bay development out on the peninsula is a prime example where you could never link that up with a lateral development around the harbour. Lack of forethought there has closed off our options for the utility we could get. So, the development of Dunedin. I've given a couple of examples there of what I call the first world and the third world. One is an apartment building which is on a marvellous site and just stands out as a third world challenge. Why are we doing that? And yet across the road we have outstanding examples of modern buildings, very well designed, which are very high quality. Our corporate body legislation in New Zealand has a great difficulty for denser development and developers doing whole block or half block developments, but within that we should encourage that as much as possible, and places like Wellington now are mounted competitions and bringing people in for models of coordinated development of more dense housing that would be so much more valuable for Dunedin and its flatter areas especially. The way we allow our frontages to be developed is very important. In fact, I recommend the seminar that's coming up in a couple of weeks' time on that very subject of the future of streets and how important they are to the value and livability of a high-value city. Now, Mosgiel. Let us develop in proportion to the value which is being added here. Ensure commercial expansion is sound and not capturing the subsidies I spoke about. Expensive living need not be subsidised. It's a choice and not a sinecure. We don't want to develop the margins where we have playing fields of bitumen lying idle that we haven't densified, as I've spoken about. The traffic counts and peak flows from Mosgiel indicate that there are a lot of commuting. People are using it as a domicile and then working in the city. We've got people travelling for services as well. But there will be some commercial development. There are opportunities there and industries which means an economic hub in itself, right? We need to recognise that. But we have to factor in those real costs of putting too much infrastructure in places which are not going to add the value to the city that we need. The guidelines for pools there give us indications about how much space is needed with 25-metre pool, etc. So going beyond that is getting out of balance with the economic underlying issues, and we should avoid that.
Could I get you to sum up pretty soon?
My last point about the budget, I strongly support shifting the ratepayer burden to the current electors who impose the $20 million a year cost of the stadium, have it an artificial turf that could be used more widely, much more than it is at the moment. The budget information, I just warn against cutting our assets in the short term. Some of the demands for dividends are very optimistic, and the divestment of portfolios has been highlighted there. There were proposals of 10 million land sales. Now, many of those are esplanade areas of extraordinary value. We haven't really analysed those, and the opportunities I've talked about for links and so on haven't been exploited. It would be very disturbing if that divestment went ahead without more scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Questions, Councillor Carroll.
Turns out that the demand for for places where people want to live is in Mosgiel. Are you proposing we just say, well, the fact that you want to live there has nothing to do with anything, it's not good for the rest of us? Or?
No, that's not anything to do with it really. It's just the underlying economics, all the economic guidelines. We shouldn't do it in a way which is subsidised. And that's really important. And given the underlying subsidies in our transport system, which are huge, billions of dollars a year, we have to be very aware of that, because once we rationalise, then those choices will be changed. So, I mean, I talked about the Google car, but before then we'll have some GPS charging and so on. And that changes the economics of those distance of commuting and the way you charge for it. And that changes people's choice of where they go. So we shouldn't be subsidising, is my point. And all the economics of agglomeration argues against that, unless there's an economic raison d'etre, which there may be, you know, if we had a large wood processor facility, but we don't have that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jared. That was a very comprehensive submission. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, everyone, for allowing us this opportunity to speak to our submission this afternoon. I'd like to introduce to you Professor Brendan Gray, who is the President of the Board of the Southern Sinfonia.
Thanks very much, Philippa. Right, okay, I'll move it to myself. Thank you. Yes, thanks very much for hearing our submission to the long-term plan. First of all, we'd like to say how very grateful we are for the long-term support that the City Council has given the orchestra, the Southern Sinfonia Orchestra, over the years. And without your support, we couldn't have done the marvellous things that we have been able to do in the city over the last few decades, really. So we're not here to ask for money. We'll be doing that next week. To your, through your grants process. But what we're here to do really is just to talk about our role as we see it in helping to support or further 3 of the City Council's long-term strategic aims. The first one is arts and culture. We are New Zealand's southernmost professional orchestra. We're also the most efficient. We do more with less than anybody else. And we've never been broke, unlike some of our northern orchestras. So we look after what money we have very well. We've got amazing national and international networks, artistic networks, and we use those to not only promote the orchestra, but also to promote Dunedin as a marvellous place for orchestral music and other kinds of music as well. And we promote education as well from the grassroots, that's from primary schools right through to university, to ensure that students of all levels are able to take part in creating this wonderful classical and orchestral style of music. The second strategy we support is economic development. We attract more than $500,000 worth of funding a year in terms of various kinds of grants. That includes about $100,000 from the City Council, but our turnover is about $750,000 a year. And most of that money goes back into the local community via the part-time salaries that we pay our players. In terms of the third strategy, social well-being, we help connect people in the city through the arts, if you like, through an arts platform, through a musical platform, through encouraging people from, right, as I said before, right from primary school level right through to university level and beyond. Obviously, we've got a lot of our supporters are my age or older. And we connect them through the various musical activities that we actually have. We're also very active in other musical groups too. Many of our players belong to other organisations, and we as an orchestra also support other musical groups such as the Dunedin City Choir as well, so we often support them in their concerts. So in conclusion, we would like to just emphasise that we play an important role in Dunedin's reputation as a city of learning and as a city of culture, and we would urge you to keep funding levels or improve funding levels to your city grants pool so that organisations like ours can continue to support Dunedin's excellent creative, cultural and artistic sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brendan. Questions, councillors? Councillor McTavish.
It's the same question that I've been asking any cultural institutions that have come in, and that is 2015-16. What's the highlight, or what's the key focus that you guys will be looking to?
Well, that actually coincides with our 50th anniversary. So next year we'll be hosting a number of events which celebrate the fact that not only are we the southernmost orchestra, but the longest lived as well.
Purely selfish question. Did you by any chance manage to make a recording of the...
We did.
And is it going to be available in some format?
It will, yes.
Very good.
One of the great things we have in the city is that we've got this great connection between the university, obviously, and the city resources too, particularly the recording facilities that we have now with the good microphones and our wonderful town hall acoustics right through the university. And the CD is being put together as we speak, so it will be available. Yeah.
Can I ask, does that utilise the fibre from
Yes,
from
it does.
here
It utilises
to the mixing suite?
It does, yes. It utilises the fibre network link between the town hall and the university. Yeah.
No further questions. Thank you very much for your...
Thank you. Thanks for hearing us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr Wiggery. Welcome, Lyndon.
Thank you, Mayor.
You have 5 minutes to regale us.
Don't know what you mean by that remark. Thank you. In my left hand, I have the public consultation copy, as you well know, of the LTP. My right hand, I have what really is the heart of the matter. It's my rates bill, which is due next week. My quarterly amount, $483.12. It's a lot. This is a worry, councillors and Mayor, to a lot of people, the rates, because nearly 1/3 of our Dunedin population is getting fast over 65. We're getting unlimited incomes. We're adding to our super with part-time work, and we're trying to keep our costs down. Unlike central government tax, local government tax keeps going up. And you'll well know from the financial strategy document that we were promised faithfully 3% increase this year unless there were exceptional circumstances. The document, as you well know, advocates a draft recommendation of 3.8 increase on this document. The exceptional circumstances, as I understand it from here, one is further money for the stadium, and the other, as you well know, is less dividends from our council companies. And as somebody said to me the other day, the two things are linked, Lyndon. We are not getting enough money from the council companies because the stadium is having a financial impact there. And because we have to, because you made the decision or recommendation to put more of our money into the stadium, that's having an impact on the proposed rates increase. My understanding last year when the stadium, I had high hopes for the stadium review. I thought that would come out with some recommendations that, as ratepayers, we could live with. And I was horrified to think that the recommendations of that stadium review, which have flowed into this, and you'll see them in my submission today, were premised on the basis of an economic return to the city and Otago between 50 to 60 million. But there was a codicil in that document which said, this is an estimate. We need to look at these figures. We need to quantify. We need to collect further data to make sure that the money that we put in the stadium we're going to return as a good investment. According to my good friend, Councillor Lee Vandervis, who I'm sorry is not here today, and may I say, just an aside, please be kind to him. All he is trying to do is get to the heart of the truth, and we'd love to see the rest of the Deloitte report, which is really part I'm sure, the tension that you guys have with him. That's where he's coming from. I've had great talks with him, and I know where he's coming from. All he wants is the truth on behalf of all of us who've elected him. So that's just a wee aside anyway. Anyway, getting back to the review, he has confirmed to me that no data collection was done. And so the stadium review recommendations went through. The recommendations flow through into this on the basis that we are going to give them, we're going to reschedule the debt, we're going to give them more money in terms of our rates, on the basis that we've got this figure plucked out of the air of $50 to $60 million. No wonder we are concerned, particularly us older ones in that over 65 category. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, you will see I've been quite negative.
Mr. Weggery, can I suggest you use your 5 minutes to submit and not present us with stuff we know isn't true? So please get to the heart of your submission, because what you are saying is simply not true.
Point of order, Mayor. Okay, thank you. As you'll see, as I was about to say, Mayor Carl, as you see from my submission, I have said no to a lot of things that have been incorporated in the plan in terms of unfunded, particularly things like the Mosgiel pool. We can't afford it. South Dunedin, I'm reluctant about that because that's where I come from. There are lots of things in terms of our stadium commitment that we simply can't afford if you are to keep to the social promise that the Mayor made in my presence at many a public meeting election time to keep rates to no more than 3%. And so really, in terms of the summary of my submissions, what I'm saying to you, ladies and gentlemen, with the greatest respect is, please look at the wider picture. What you end up with this is going to have an impact on this, and a good 1/3 of us who are starting to really watch our pennies as we get into that limited time of thing. It may not happen to you at the moment. You may be earning a good crust, but it will happen to you one day, and you'll be sitting here saying the same things as I am saying when you come to my age. That's the thrust of our submission, and I think a lot of people behind me in the 65 plus are saying the same thing, who'd love to be here with me today saying the same thing to you with the greatest respect. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Lyndon, can I kick off the questions with a question? Do you know are you aware where Dunedin sits in terms of rates levels with regard to the rest of the country?
Yes, I'm aware, Mayor, that we're not facing Christchurch's 9% or even Auckland's 10%.
No, I'm not talking, sorry, I didn't explain it well enough. Do you know where our rates levels compared with other rates levels? I'm not talking about the increase, I'm talking about where we sit in compared with other councils.
But I don't think that is a relevant factor. I think that we should pride ourselves on keeping our rates.
Can you just answer me? Do you know or don't you?
I did know, I did see the figures about a year ago, but I've not seen the up-to-date figures. What I am saying back to you, Mayor Carl, is that we need to keep our rates in line with inflation, which is less than 0.1%.
Well, actually, local government costs are not 0.1%.
Well,
Dunedin's rates are the lowest of the metros and in the lowest quartile right across the country.
Right, so let's keep them that way.
Lyndon, with the focus on the 65-year-old plus category and thinking about the rates rebate scheme, which is a central government scheme, do you think that the uptake, and if you take the people that you converse with, do you think the uptake with that rebate scheme is being maximised? Are people making the most of that? Obviously, if they're eligible, they need to be eligible, of course.
I don't think they are. I think that a lot of people are not aware of it. I think there may be processes, there may be pride involved, but I think it's an artificial subsidy scheme which would cover over the fact that our rates may be too high for a certain sector of the community, which is the growing sector of the community. So I don't really want to sort of dwell on the rates rebate scheme as sort of a panacea to the affordability. Part of the LTP is making us an affordable city. And I think that we need to address that question, that this city is affordable to all generations. We've paid a fair share. I mean, if we're going to be paying rates, I'd rather see my rates paid to address, in terms of your committee, the millions of dollars needed for pipe renewals.
Councillor Wilson's committee.
Right, sorry, Kathy, yeah, okay. But that's where I think is our core business. And I may be perhaps conservative there, but I think that never goes away.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Dave.
Mr. Pat.
Ladies and gentlemen, I suspect you're waiting for lunch, and I am too, so I'll be very brief. Thank you. In regards to the Mayfair Theatre, firstly I'd like to thank you very much for our grant for the last 12 months, for the employment of a manager. We find that it is virtually essential for us to have a manager in place. The theatre is, I won't say thriving, but it is surviving, and which it probably won't do if we can't get a manager. Now, I'm not here to apply for his grant today. I do that in a couple of weeks' time. But I would like to urge you to put as much money as you can into that grant scheme, because its benefit to us is huge, as I'm sure the other recipients. And also, one point I would like to make about that is, for us, it would be great to be able to have a grant for more than 1 year. At the moment, it's a very sort of hand-to-mouth existence. Our current manager retires at the end of this month, and we are holding off seeking a replacement until we know if we can afford it. And when we do that, that will just be probably a 12-month contract. If we were able to look at the grant scheme for a longer period of time, that certainly would give us a lot more security, and also the person involved would probably love to know that they have a bit more security as well. So I'd like you to consider that. Difficulties that we're having in the theatre, we've successfully transferred from the Dunedin Opera Company to an independent charitable trust, and we are now sort of into our second year of operation. We are trying to do a few things to upgrade the theatre. You will have seen in the paper in the last couple of weeks new lighting trusses that have been installed. And the work that we are doing at the moment is upgrading the stage area, which is very important, but it is work that we can do without a building consent or any kind of consents. The minute we trigger a consent, we're in big money. For an example, we have a second-hand sink sitting downstairs that we would love to install in our assembly room. It's just a matter of putting it in place, running the water pipe across to it and connecting to the drain, which is just behind the outside wall. Now, because that will require a consent to do that, the cost of taking this sink that we already own and installing it is approximately $1.5 million, because the minute we get a consent, we look at all our other issues. So we're desperately trying. This is why we've asked if you could consider in your long-term plan funding to assist the theatre get its goals. We have talked to the funders that are most likely to help us out, think places like the Community Trust, lotteries, and they're all quite enthusiastic, but the problem is they will come in after we have made a start, and it's the initial start which is so difficult, and the initial step is all the compliance issues. So that is where we're at the moment. We just ask you to look upon us favourably. We have had a meeting with some of our users recently, and one of our users said that probably if the Mayfair Theatre goes, they will probably go as well, because they can't see any viable alternative in the city in terms of a small theatre that is well equipped for stage work, but also, unlike the school halls, they can take control of it for 2 weeks with no other users. So it holds a very important place in the city, and we look at some of the people who have made their starts in their careers on the Mayfair stage, such as Jonathan Lamalu. I remember him as a schoolboy singing in a chorus, and he's now world famous. So we feel it's a very important place in Dunedin, and would like you to consider it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, going back to your sink,
yeah.
Are any of the things that would be triggered discretionary as far as council is concerned? I'm aware that sometimes we work triggers earthquake strengthening, fire egress, disabled access, or whatever. I don't know which things are triggered, but are any of what is triggered up to council to decide whether to do it or not, or require it or not?
Largely, I think the compliance issues, which, as you say, earthquake, fire protection, which means sprinklers, disabled access and more toilets. But some of those, I mean, disabled access and more toilets, the patrons desperately, or the disabled access is a biggie, which involves putting a lift in. And a lot of those issues on their own are not, well, we're a chicken and egg situation because we can't cost things out because we can't afford to get all the plans drawn up. So, but we have estimates. I mean, a lift, somebody estimated at about $100,000.
No, sorry, I didn't explain it well enough. There are some things, there's some bits of work that are triggered, that are required by central government legislation regardless of what, of anything. And there are others that are as I understand it, that in some situations are at the discretion of the local council. And what I'm asking is, have you ascertained which are completely required by central government legislation and we have no choice in, and which may be, I don't know, it's at the discretion of our building inspectors?
To be honest, we haven't actually made that distinction. We just have assumed that we're going to have to do all of it eventually. And I guess that's
I'll ask our staff to follow that up with you. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that there's sometimes a difference.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's one of the other things, that if we can be given time to pick things off one item at a time, certainly it would be very good.
Councillor Wilson.
Are you aware of the rules reduction task force that the government's seeking submissions on at the moment and close on the 1st of June about this sort of thing that you're talking about?
No.
And the question there for you, Your Worship, is I know that we're looking at putting a submission in, and it's a lot of work for this type of organisation to put that submission in. Then can you share that with Marie and the team? So
the rules reduction task force.
Yeah. Because I think it's a wonderful example of those untoward consequences that are holding up development. We might catch up with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions? Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate your submission.
Thank you for your time.
Welcome, Bridget Bailey from Trust Power. Welcome.
It's not Bridget today, it's Lara.
Oh, it's Lara, sorry, we've got the wrong name here.
Yeah, that's right.
My apologies.
So my name's Lara Burkhart. And I have handed around the submissions and just a hard copy of what I've prepared to just put on the screen, which is just sort of 3 or 4 slides that I thought might just help with the presentation, if I can make it big.
Right. The next 10 minutes are yours to do what you want.
Thank you. So, my name's Lara Burkhart. I'm a resource management lawyer from Holland Beckett Lawyers in Tauranga, and I'm here for Trust Power. Now, Trust Power, if you're not already aware, owns and operates the Deep Stream Hydroelectric Power Scheme. I'll click forward. These are some images just to set the scene in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of, I guess, the kit. Half of the scheme sort of sits in your district, and then the other half that has the powerhouses on it sit over in your neighbour's Clutha. The scheme, just by way of summary, was consented in 2004. It was commissioned in 2008. It sits above Lake Mahinarangi on the Deep Stream diversion. And it's got 2 generating sites, 2 powerhouses each, with a total generating capacity of 3 each, so that equals 6. And in terms of supply of electricity to households, that supplies about 3,000 households. In terms of its capital value, in total that's about 24 million, and we estimate that the capital value of the asset, that's the part of the asset that sits in your district, is about 13 million. So that probably takes me to paragraph 5 of the written submissions that I did also hand around, and I just wanted to remind you that of the reason Trustpower have sent me here today, and it's in relation to the Strathtyre Erie non-residential general rate that's been imposed on the deep stream scheme on a stepped basis, and Trustpower is well aware that this has been happening because it's been happening for about the last 5 years. Probably what they haven't had an appreciation for is how much it would incrementally increase over that period of time, and we've still got another 2 years of increases to go before we get to, I guess, our full rates burden exposure for that particular scheme. And I guess it's probably with the fullness of time, that we're 5 years in, that they've started to do, I guess, a bit of back calculation and realise where this is now and where it's heading. And I guess the submission I'm making to you today is that Trustpower has looked at this a little bit more closely and thinks that at this point in time they're paying more than their reasonable fair share of rates. And I suspect, I'm not sure that Council has considered the implication of this rate on a high capital value asset like Trustpower's hydro scheme. But certainly if you look at the extent of Trustpower's interest and activities in the district and apply those who benefit should contribute to the cost approach, as well as look at the overall dollar and incremental percentage increase and compare it to what Trustpower pays in terms of per megawatts around the country, you'll see that we're getting quite a disproportionate and quite a large variance. So we probably could have come last year and said the same thing, and probably even the year before. I've put in a table up here just how the rates have increased since the stepped increase was introduced, to try and no issue with what Council's trying to achieve, just not sure Trustpower's the ones that should be paying for it. So its scheme rates back in 2010, before this I guess policy was brought in, was about just under 30,000, and you'll see every year since then for the last 5 years it's sort of increased in about $10,000 increments. And so next year Trustpower will be paying 85,000 based on a capital value of 13 million, and there's the differential that applies for non-residential, I guess, properties or activities doesn't differentiate within it. You know, it's just everything else that remains because you do have differentials for lifestyle, residential, farmland, and residential heritage B&Bs, but there's no differential, for example, to recognise a high capital value asset like this one that could be categorised in an infrastructure utility or electricity type way. So just to give you a little bit of a comparison in terms of other rates that Trustpower pays for similar assets, hydro assets in other districts, I thought this might be quite a useful table for you to ponder. So, based on the rates, as you can see, the rates for Matahina are 240,000. Now that's for an 80 megawatt scheme. So per megawatt, that comes out at about 3,000. The next sort of highest and the closest to what Deep Stream is rated is at Patea in South Taranaki. That's a 32 megawatt scheme, and that pays on average per megawatt about $4,000. Waipuri is quite comparatively small, so that's probably at the other end of the scale, but I think you can sort of see that around that middle area, Trustpower is sort of looking between 2,000 and 4,000 per megawatt. So for Deep Stream, at a total generating capacity of 6 megawatts, is paying $14,000 per megawatt. And I guess it's probably that exercise that Trustpower did internally that caused it to look at this a bit more closely and say, hey, this is starting to get a little bit out of proportion with what its rates burden in other parts of the country are. What's the justification for it here? Because there may well be one. And so we had a closer look at that. None of the long-term plans since this was introduced, and even leading up to its introduction, really recognises Trustpower's contribution to this particular rate. And if the rate's applied next year, Trustpower's total contribution to the 162,000 that's council's wanting to collect from Strath Tyree is 53%. So I guess Trustpower's interested if there has actually been any sort of specific thought given to this particular situation, and if not, could some thought be given to it? Because in terms of how Trustpower benefits from the activities that are funded, it benefits very, very little. It benefits in terms of roads, but not much else beyond that. So, in my submission, I've gone into that in a little bit more detail in paragraphs 14 and 15. And on that benefactor exacerbator sort of approach, we don't think that it's an equitable outcome in terms of the very little benefit Trustpower receives from funded activities. In terms of the rationale for this rate per se, we would say that's largely unrelated to Trustpower's scheme, which is separate and isolated from the Strath Tyree and largely Dunedin area, and the economic state of Strath Tyree does not influence Trustpower's operations, nor does Trustpower benefit from economic growth in that area. And in other districts, and the one that sprung to mind was Whakatane, infrastructure and utility assets like Trustpower's, and no doubt the councils as well, would be exempt from a rate targeting economic growth or targeting land users and businesses to meet the costs of economic growth, which I think in this particular area you're wanting to lift the Strath Tyree rate up to what it is in other parts of your district, because the Otago Rail Trail's now being constructed and it's on a bit more of an even playing field. Was there a question? So, how am I going?
Yep. Well, would you want to open it up to questions?
Well, I just wanted to sort of put the solution out there, because I don't think when you sort of look at that, and in a lot of these other areas, there is effectively a cap that recognises high capital value assets, and I just think it might be appropriate for council in this particular context to have a look at that kind of approach and possibly develop a differential for utility, electricity, etc. Because there is no cap at the moment. The higher the capital value, the larger the contribution. At this stage, it's 53%. For that particular area, which seems disproportionate to us in terms of the benefits Trustpower receive from funded activities. So, yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
Councillor McTavish.
I think it's ready to go.
Oh.
Well, I don't know about ready to go.
Well, in that case, a couple of questions. Firstly, have you done the same analysis per capital value against capital value? Yeah, and I'm sorry these figures weren't able to be included. So, so as I said, Deepstream has $13 million worth of kit in your district. 13 out of the total capital values, 24. Waipuri is 50. The total.
But the bit that's in that area, the capital value including that is
13. Waipuri is, and I'll go through it just in case people want to make notes. Waipuri is 54.5 million. Mitahina's 149 million. Coleridge's 37 million. Kaimai's 59. Pātia's 61. Cobb is 37. Branch is 7. And Mangere is 1.2, which is mainly land value there for some reason. The concrete's not worth much.
And your and the activity status is it what's the zone, the underlying zone for your? It is rural.
I probably in your area. Yeah. Okay, I thought you asked me for all the others, and I was really going to start scratching my brain. I would, I think it's rural. Yeah. I'd be surprised if it's not.
Thanks.
Yeah, and that would be for the most part. Just because of the nature of the activity. It's on rivers and.
Councillor Calvert.
I'm concerned a wee bit about the sort of floodgates argument that you're inviting us to go down the track of, in a way, because a lot of our customers don't feel like they get anything like the value. Our commercial and industrial people in particular, but also our rural people. If we went down the track that you're inviting of whether a ratepayer is getting a proportionate benefit, are you really suggesting we do that generally or just for you?
Well, Trustpower doesn't think that it shouldn't pay a general rate. It absolutely is happy to pay a general rate and acknowledges that for most of its assets it doesn't particularly benefit from the activities they fund. But in respect of this particular rate, because 98% of the total rates it pays is this Strath Tyree specific.
I'm not talking about the general rate. I'm talking about generally our ratepayers that are commercial, industrial or rural would say that they're getting nothing like good value for the rates they pay. They're paying more and they're only getting a road or half a access to a library card or something, and they're not feeling like they're getting benefit. So your argument that the benefit a ratepayers get should be proportionate to the rates they pay. Are you suggesting we should look at all the ratepayers and the benefit they get and then readjust them?
I'm not sure you need to go that far, but I think it's definitely a relevant consideration, and it's one of your own funding principles. So when things are getting so, well, in my submission, as disproportionate as they are now, where you've got a hydro scheme that seems to have a relative high capital value, paying 53% of an area's non-residential rate, I think that's something that needs to be looked at in a bit more detail.
Generally, our commercial and industrial ratepayers pay sort of half-ish compared with the residential rates in Dunedin in general, and they would have the same argument. It's about a half and half, sort of. Can you tell us what proportion of Trustpower's expenditure is rates?
No, I can't.
Just trying to get a flavour of whether it has any significance in the overall scheme of the cost of your business.
Well, it's certainly, well, I think what you can see from up here, what they pay in rates down here is significantly higher per megawatt, and a megawatt of electricity is a megawatt of electricity than they do elsewhere. So certainly those are costs that go into the viability of every scheme. But I think what you're asking is, would Trustpower go under if it had to pay this rate? And the answer is no.
No, I'm just trying to figure out how many million you're making compared with how much rates sort of you're paying. So just to get a feel for the relevance of the rate spend. That was all. If you don't have an answer, that's fine.
Probably all I'd say to that is, if you see Trustpower as a deep pocket that can pay high rates, disproportionate to benefits, then that's not an approach that is endorsed or allowed by the statutory regime. The ability of someone to pay isn't actually relevant to your consideration of applying rates policy.
Not whether you can, just Anyway, where are most of Trustpower's customers?
Reasonably spread throughout the country. Yeah. So and as are their assets, and one of the reasons for that is Trustpower. Trustpower has, out of its 19 hydro schemes, a large proportion of those are embedded schemes, which means they are embedded into the local distribution network, so they're not supplying Transpower for the national grid. So, the customers are equally spread around the country as well. So, Deepstream, I believe, is an embedded scheme, so it's for local supply, not for the national grid.
I guess my question was much the same. Look, I have great sympathy. I think it's crazy that one ratepayer on a very small area of land is paying 53% of what's coming off an area. But I guess where my sympathy sort of stops a wee bit is the ability to pay. I mean, as a dairy farm, I pay a quarter of that, but I won't make a quarter of what. Yeah. Well, the question is, what would you make off a 6 kilowatt station? Like, what sort of income is that?
Oh, look, I haven't got anyone from the company with me, and I couldn't answer.
No,
I couldn't answer that question. I'd just repeat that a ratepayer's ability to pay is not relevant.
Yeah, no, and I understand that too. Yeah.
Councillor Thompson. Well, I note the comment that the ratepayer's ability to pay isn't relevant, but it seems that it's money will change the headline. Probably better you didn't hear that.
I did.
My questions, firstly, is of what possible relevance is the proportion of the Strathtyre rate that you will be paying to this argument?
The rates, as far as we understand the rationale, the rates targeted at council recovering costs expended to assist with economic growth. So the reason that's relevant is the expenditure of council in pursuit of that has no relevance to Trustpower and what it does in your district. So it does seem disproportionate in terms of...
My question is, you seem to be emphasising that the fact that you will be paying X% of the Strathtyre rate is of some relevance to this question, and I'm asking why it's of relevance to this question. If, for example, you were taking the water not from the Strathtyre, but let's just use a little fantasy for the waters of the Leith in central Dunedin, the rate would be an exceptionally small percentage of the rate take from the area. Would you be arguing that that was relevant and therefore it should be increased?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. In terms of water use, that's sort of factored into the rates that Trustpower would pay to a regional council, not a district council.
Look, my point is not the water use. My point is that I'm asking why you are relating it to a particular geographical area. Because the general rate is not just applied to Strathtyre, is it? It's applied to the whole city. The stepping up here was to remove an anomaly between what Strathtyre was paying and the rest of the city. So my question is, of what relevance is it to that it's a certain percentage of that particular area?
Well, all I can say to that, it's relevant in that it serves to demonstrate that a differential applied to capital value results, in my view, in a disproportionate rates burden.
Of a particular suburb of the city.
But it is a suburb rate.
So the fact. Right. Second question: what does Trustpower pay for the water that it takes from here?
well, there is no charge on water anywhere in New Zealand.
Right.
So I don't understand that question either.
No, that's right.
Because nobody owns the water, and it's an issue the government's grappling with at the moment, and so there is no charge on water, if you like.
All right, that was a silly question, so I'll retreat from that one. The former one. What it seems to me that you're saying is that you should be treated differently in terms of how you're rated than any other business in the city boundaries.
Except the stadium.
Well, except the stadium. So that's essentially your argument.
Well, the city's found good reason to differentiate other activities. This is called a non-residential sort of differential, and it seems to be the category for everything else apart from the ones that have been identified are appropriate for their own grouping. So I don't think it's a stretch to suggest that with the level of differential that's been applied, that it might be appropriate to establish a category for high capital value infrastructure and utility assets. And it's not uncommon, and it's present elsewhere in the country.
Which would shift that rates burden on to ordinary ratepayers in the city.
Well, I guess it's got to go somewhere. But if you put your, I guess, rates burden on a scheme that was bigger, you'd be getting to a level of rates that perhaps did affect viability.
Right.
Possibly.
Last question, just to use a personal example.
Sure.
I'm a retailer. In my previous location, paid about $25,000 a year in rates, which is about a quarter of what you're looking at here. The scale substantially different. So why is it that lots of other businesses would feel, as Councillor Calvert says, that they are paying a share of community costs that they're not necessarily benefiting from directly, but have to do so, but it shouldn't apply to you?
And as I do want to stress that Trustpower is not saying it shouldn't pay a general rate.
Just not this one.
Can I just clarify something here, because I think this, and I'm not sure it impinges on your question, Councillor Thompson, but I'm glad Carolyn's here, because my understanding is the reason it's called a Strathtyre rate is that it's in transition from residential up to commercial. So the first thing is it's not a targeted rate. I'm just trying to clarify this. It's not a targeted rate, but it is called something different from commercial or non-residential or whatever we call it at the moment, because it's in a state of stepping. So I just need to, and just for the benefit of everyone and myself, I just need to have that confirmed that it is not a targeted rate. It is a rate in transition from residential to non-residential, and non-residential covers everything that isn't rural, lifestyle or residential. Is that right?
Amalgamation, and we're transitioning out of it so that commercial properties in Strathtyre will pay the same as any other property in the city when we get to the end of it. Sorry.
Do I need to repeat that?
Yes, please.
So it is a general rate differential at the moment that was put in place quite some time ago. Once we get through, so the 17-18 year is the final year of it, it won't be called a special Strathtyre differential anymore. The commercial differential or non-residential differential, whatever we call it,
will be paid the same wherever you are in the city.
Right. So the reason I'm clarifying that is to, because I think it sort of
that was the
obviates
point of my first question. That
yeah,
it's,
obviates the question.
what's the relevance?
This isn't in the ultimately when it reaches when the non-residential rate in the Strathtyre reaches its end point, it will no longer be called the Strathtyre rate. It'll just be the non-residential rate for the whole of the city. And so, with respect, I suggest that, as Councillor Thompson's suggesting, that the proportion of the Strathtyre rate is not kind of relevant because
okay, all right, that's helpful.
City, right?
I can appreciate that.
Put it much more succinctly than I did.
Yeah, no, it was my not understanding.
Councillor Thank you. How much do you pay for rates for the other half of the scheme that's in Clutha?
The other half of the scheme in Clutha is on DOC-owned land, and as I understand it, DOC doesn't pay any rates. In your area, Trustpower's the landowner, but not the landowner on the other side. The other aspect of the scheme is that the reservoir has a dual function as a dry year municipal water supply reserve.
Yeah, thanks, Lara. Just to clarify, the original submission talked about a 5 megawatt scheme, and you talk about 6. I know that's. So, do you know which it is?
Yeah, it's
6, definitely.
Yeah,
yep,
so that's just.
That's all right.
Having the information corrected. Yeah. In the sort of scheme details, it's described as 2.523 megawatt powerhouses. So the 5 has come from 2.5 times 2, and the 6 has come from 3.
That's
so
fine.
It's a range.
Thank you. It's more in terms of the resource rather than the rates, actually. But are you familiar with the way the scheme transfers water out of the Deep Stream, Deep Creek catchments into the Waipori catchment? Are you familiar with the scheme, the way it's transferring from one catchment to another, out of the Dunedin city's water scheme area? Not?
No.
Okay.
I know that it diverts into Lake
Mahinarangi. Yeah.
Yes.
It's transferring it from one catchment to another.
Correct.
Yeah, that's right. And out of the water, the city's own Deep Creek, Deep Stream water catchment, which is sometimes is short. You don't. But that's all right. You hear about rates, not resource. Did you have a resource consent? Do you know how long it's for?
If it was granted in 2004, I'd assume it was given the 35-year term. Obviously, any land use components are usually in perpetuity.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Declaring an interest in the Strathtyre differential, but I don't think it has much merit on this. I would love to understand why you look at the output comparing it to the cost of rates, because that's the one thing we don't do with rates. It's always done on capital value.
Yeah, and that's why that's why it was useful to go through the capital value of those other schemes, and there should have been another column in that table. And I guess from the company's perspective, the value of the scheme is intrinsically tied to the amount of electricity it can generate. This is a relatively small scheme that seems to be paying a relatively high rates bill.
I was intrigued. My understanding is that you actually lease a whole lot of the land from the DCC at $1 per year for the scheme, but I may have that wrong, but I can remember it was something that Peter Chin...
I think that's right. Some of the land is leased, but Trustpower owns quite a large proportion, 854 hectares itself, is the information I've got. The lease, I believe, is over the dam and reservoir. But there's 7 kilometres of small canals and obviously the powerhouses. So yeah.
And the reason I raise that is that I don't know that anyone in this room completely remembers or recalls the history of this, and I'm not claiming to, but that was always a risk when this was developed, and maybe that's the quid pro quo, that knowing that we're doing a small lease, that there was the opportunity for the rates, because they're potentially, do you pay $1 rates on any other land where you have infrastructure?
Lease.
Or lease,
You
sorry,
mean
lease.
Munda lease?
Because
I
that's, yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the big picture, and while this may be complicated by this, I'm just not saying it's the complete picture. But albeit, I also have some sympathy with your argument, and I'm just wondering, the Mackenzie case, which came out, I think, in 1990, the Mackenzie District Council and the rates that they set for electricity infrastructure, are you aware of that case?
No, I'm not.
Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Looking at the deep stream, total megawatt production is 6 megawatts and Waipori is 89.6. Now they're basically one structure, but they've been divided by city and Clutha district. So if you add both of them together, your rate per megawatt is about $1,400, between $1,400 and $1,500 on production, rather than $14,000 by separating them out. Now, would Waipori be able to produce 89.6 megawatts if it wasn't for the extra water coming from deep stream?
The information that I've got in terms of some of this detail is that 15% of the inflows into Lake Mahinarangi come from deep stream. So in that respect, you'd attribute 15% of the output to deep stream.
Yep. So 15% of say 90 megawatts is a fair proportion, because this graph you've got rates on per megawatt is false if you look at the whole thing as a combined unit, which it is. So the production is the lowest out of per megawatt. If you take that as one thing, the production per megawatt,
yeah, no, I understand the calculation.
It's cheaper than anywhere else in any of the.
Yeah, no, I understand the calculation and the correlation you're making, and certainly because Clutha have, I guess, relatively low rates.
But even getting away from their rate, Waipori couldn't produce that amount of power without the deep stream feed. Would that be right? Because you're saying 15% of the water goes across there.
Yep.
So that would reduce production out of Waipori by 15%.
Look, can I just suggest we're getting into discussion here, and I mean, some of these points are really well made, and as yours are, but I just want to get back to questions so that we have as much information from you as we need, because we're not going to make a decision or a recommendation to our executive today. So can I come back to Councillor Noon with a question? On issue, sorry, Councillor Hall, have you got any other questions? Councillor Noon.
Thank you, Worship. With regards to the price of the lease, I want to ask a question to try and ascertain, is there a community good factor in the availability of water from the dam when we're in a drought situation, and are you able to supply maybe some figures to estimate the community good factor, whether we accept that's another point, but it would be useful to understand there is a value on that.
I don't have that, but I'm happy to provide it, and I can do that through the administrator if you're happy for me to take that question away.
That'd be good.
Are there further questions? No? So, thank you. I think we've got enough information.
Thank you.
It may be that our executive come back to you for the substantive discussion, but I think we've got all the questions answered that we have asked. And thank you for that.
No, I appreciate the extra time you've given me, and hopefully that hasn't run other people into the evening. I don't get home late. Thank you.
So thank you, Lara.
Do I just unplug? Yeah. It's gone. Oh no, it's still there. I hope not. Thank
Sean Hogan. Welcome, Sean.
Hi.
The next, here we go. You're the broad-based school. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, I'd just like to start by saying I'm entirely happy with the rates that are paid. I'm not looking for any reduction in the course of this discussion. You should have my submission in front of you, which is on the Portobello Road improvement plan. And I won't read through the whole thing. The only bit which I thought was sort of slightly unusual enough to talk to was towards the bottom of page 1, where looking at the NZTA estimates of the social costs of the road accidents along that road gives a total for a 5-year period of about 11.5 million. Now, this is a road safety improvement plan, so we'd hope that we'd be actually improving the safety along the road. Otherwise, why would we be doing this? And I had to make some sort of estimate of what would be reasonable, and I've gone for a figure of 30%. To be clear, that's not reducing the crashes by 30%. In fact, it's not reducing a single crash. It's reducing the severity of crashes. We've had some very recent examples of just how nasty that road can be. The sort of safety improvements that are being suggested would mean a little more space, more chance that, if I look at my area of road, 67% are head-on or corner crashes. Head-on crashes are the most dangerous. If the road is a little safer, you're looking at those crashes being a little less destructive and a little less costly. If we looked at 30% reduction in the social cost of crashes, you'd be looking at saving over those 7 years that you accelerate the plan, another 4.8 million in social costs. And of course, those social costs aren't just about dollars, they're about people's lives. So the danger in not taking action and accelerating the plan is actually to have more preventable crashes. So that's why I really want to commend the plan to Council today, and commend Council for coming up with a plan to get it built quicker at a lower cost. And that's really the centre of what I wanted to say today, and happy to take any questions if people have any.
Questions, councillors? Councillor McTavish.
Yeah, I guess I do have a question, and that is, we've had a number of community members come and just talk about, or raise up, ask us to consider how we might be able to retain some of the character along that road. And one of the things that has struck me is that there are a number of young people in the community that have been passionate about this.
Yes.
If we were to put together some sort of community advisory group or group of people that were used as a touchstone through that process, do you think that there would be a role for a young person on that group?
I think that would be great, and I'd say take a little further and look at having a link into the 3 local community schools, and particularly Broad Bay has worked quite hard around the submission process, and the children are quite informed and involved. You'll have seen their submissions. And you know, certainly in my head, and it doesn't just have to be a beautification process, but it could be, that you'd actually involve the children in some aspects of that, and get them thinking. Almost all the schools, I think, along the peninsula are involved in the Enviro Schools project. Get them thinking about ways to ameliorate things, ways to make things even better, and for them to feel like they can feed that in. I think that'd be wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean.
I think I got off easy. Thank you.
Christine Geary. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. And it's great to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity to submit the long-term plan. And it feels like we've come an awful long way, even since last year. As I've mentioned previously, The board, obviously you've read the submission and we talk about a number of things, but I want to start with our two main projects, and particularly the Portobello Harrington Point Road Safety Improvement Project. We've heard from Sean, and just a reminder about it coming out of the community in the first place, and we've come an awful long way in 10 years. I don't think we have to persuade you. It feels like we're all singing from the same song sheet, and that feels very good. The savings are extraordinary, and I really do compliment both council and your staff around finding a way to do this in a shorter time, saving a great deal of money. And it just seems to be a win-win from every perspective. We're all aware of the benefits. And when the Port Chalmers site is finished, a nearly marathon length, which has all sorts of potential for events. But I just want to focus on that question that you raised, Councillor McTavish, because it's something that we've put a bit of thought into since we last came to you. We've got, if this is signed off, as I hope and anticipate it will be very soon by both Council and NZTA, then we've got the luxury, if you like, of actually looking, because we're looking at a whole package, the luxury of a number of things. In the community, we've articulated the fact that the order will no longer be an issue because it will be delivered sooner than it would have been under the original program, and the order will be down to the contractors to get the synergies and the cost efficiencies. So putting that to one side. Also, I think everyone's very aware of the inconvenience and disruption, and that'll be something we'll need to live with, and all of us have got some experience of that along the stretch of road and with Turnbulls Bay and Harrington Point Road. So I think there's an acceptance of that. But we do have the luxury of looking at the whole package, and what I would like to see us do as soon as we've got sign-off is form a group which involves urban design, environmental folk, people with different expertise beside our engineers who've been working so hard, and look at some of the things we might do to make this an exceptional project in terms of those aspects. And with looking at that whole section, looking at it as a whole section, I think we have the opportunity to do that. So the board would certainly be interested in that. We've focused on getting it across the line. That's our main focus at the moment. But that isn't far away from our thought at all. And in regards to that, the boardwalks need to have some communication to the community again. Not everyone's up to speed on that, on the heritage walls and the reason for that and so forth. So we sometimes find that people move into the community between when something's planned and when something's delivered, or they perhaps haven't engaged with the process, and so there's a bit of communication there that can be done. I will say though that in the sections to come, those communities have been very engaged and have inputted extensively. The second project, Tauroni, just asking Council to continue the ongoing support and for that funding to be carried forward. It's going very well. We anticipate that this long-standing project, there will be progress quite soon. So we thank Council for its support and ask that that continues. We have a number of other priorities, and as I've mentioned to you before, we have put a lot of work into updating our community plan, and this very much follows our community plan. Freedom camping and the bylaw review is obviously right up there in terms of priority, and I do urge you around providing resources for the new bylaw, whatever that new bylaw is. If it's going to be effective, then it needs to have resources behind it, and this is the opportunity to say that to you. We've been through 2 bylaws now without the resources, and that has been a problem, so it needs to be robust, and you need to be able to deliver the enforcement. The Coast Guard, I believe they were here last evening to tell you about that. The support that you might give would be through the facilitation, through the consent process, and maybe some project management support. And it is a really important project. We've had a number of really important rescues in the last 2 weeks, and it just emphasises to our board the importance of quick deployment of our local Coast Guard. Ultra-fast broadband, I've mentioned this before. It's an issue for our rural and semi-rural people throughout a number of community board areas, and we would really like to see some advocacy from Council on this. Can you use Gigaton as a platform with which to advocate for our communities? We'd like some further discussion on that. We've mentioned pullover areas on the Peninsula Road. In the Glenorchy area on that road, I believe the accident statistics, the trend has been down since they put in those pullover areas. Certainly on Highcliffe Road, that would be appropriate, and we would ask for some resources to be made available for those to be put in. Another perennial is the provision of a toilet at the end of Seal Point Road, and that's noted there in detail. Pest control, you might have seen on national television the app development by the biodiversity group that made national headlines. They're doing some tremendous work. It's been used as a model. I've just come from the ORC that's held it up as a model for other groups, and we would ask for your ongoing support with that. In conclusion, I'd like to compliment the staff who've been working very hard on our projects, various projects, and in particular the team that are delivering that road safety improvement project and working behind the scenes. I don't think the public necessarily realise how much work goes on behind the scenes. And I would also just like to note the tremendous engagement from the school children in terms of the submission project. It's been fantastic to see community engagement from those children. They know how to submit now. That's going to be a life skill for them, and they're going to be very interested in your deliberations. And I'm really open to questions if you have any.
Councillors. Councillor Calvert.
Sorry, 2 questions. One about the Portobello Road. I can see the importance of having other input into that stretch. It worries me a wee bit that we are assuming that we can make savings by doing it quicker. We could lose those savings again if we look at them and think, oh, well, there's now some money that it could cost more. You know, so I'd like to know that when you want to be part of the how it happens, that you are also committed to not thinking that there's any more money in the budget than what we've already stretched to do, just to make it happen smarter, but not to cost any more money. So.
I think we're very well aware of the tight constraints of the budget, but it's around being smarter about the way we do it, and I don't think it has to cost more money necessarily. I don't know the answer to that, but I think we all understand the tight budget constraints. Yeah.
And the second question is, it looks to me like you've submitted on the South Dunedin Library Community Hub, whatever it is, complex in the middle of there. Was that on purpose?
No,
and when you
I
said
believe
status quo, don't do anything,
there was some error in relation. I remember reading our governance support officer submitted, and there was some issue, I think.
Yeah. So can we take that out of your submission
because it's our submission whatsoever.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Wish. Thanks, Chris. Just about your issue around communication and your new arrivals on the peninsula at some point along a project, or people who haven't engaged with that process or whatever. And I'm not being facetious in suggesting this, but would that not be an ideal role for the community board to take on?
Well, it's something that we do all the time through our community newsletters, but it's quite interesting the way that you'll come to the delivery of a project. You've talked about it in community newsletters, you've advertised in various ways. There's been submission processes, and suddenly someone will engage at that point because it's right there in their face. I don't know what the answer is, and we have got Tammy coming to our next meeting around community engagement. We're pretty efficient. I would suggest we're pretty efficient at it now out there, but I do find that if someone moves into the community, sometimes they just don't quite understand when we're talking about something. We might understand the language, but they might not connect it with them until it's actually happening.
I mean, I think we're all well aware of the situation that you're speaking of. And I just wondered what exactly you had in mind that we could do to help that process, that we're either not doing well enough or not doing it all, or...
I think the heritage walls is a good example. And I've made suggestions to the media that it might be a really good story to talk about why that's necessary. That was something that Heritage New Zealand required that to be in the consent. It's a consent condition. Whether we agree or not as a community board is neither here nor there. It is a consent condition, but about educating the community about why that's necessary. is quite important. So that's an example.
Better RMA education in general would be good, I think.
Oh yes,
Thanks.
absolutely,
Yeah.
you're spot on, yeah. And thank you for listening. And you're about to hear an example of why this is going to be so important, this road safety development. Thank you very much. I look forward to the positive news at some point.
Thank you. I'd like to speak regarding the Peninsula road widening and asking you to speed that up as soon as possible. Like many ratepayers, I'm probably guilty of taking only an interest in the decisions that affect me. I'm very aware of things. Yes, there is going to be a new pool in Mosgiel, but I don't live in Mosgiel. I'm not going to swim in it. I'm probably not going to cycle along the cycleways in South Dunedin. And I did read an article in November about the road widening on the peninsula and thought, oh, good idea. And I continued to read the rest of my paper and think nothing more of it until about a week later, when my 17-year-old restricted driver and her 20-year-old sister, who has had a licence for 3 years, were driving out towards Portobello. And as they came around a corner, around the bend, towards them came a red vehicle on the wrong side of the road. And my restricted driver had a very quick decision to make. And fortunately, there was a slow vehicle bay. She swerved into it, pulled back onto the road because she had no choice, and then heard an almighty bang as the car that they had missed the car behind them but hit the one following. Somebody ended up in the harbour. And over the days that followed, well, the hours that followed, I had a 17-year-old look at me and say, well, what should I have done, Mum? What if there hadn't been that slow vehicle bay? And what decision should I have made? Should I have gone into the harbour or should I have hit him? Not really the decision you expect your teenager to make on a Wednesday evening. So it was a difficult time. She was doing everything right, her sister said. She was, and so we have a lot to be grateful for. Grateful for that it was daylight, grateful that her father had taken her on that road a few times when she had learnt to drive, grateful that she obeys by the rules. In fact, she was driving even slower because she thought it was quite windy. And grateful for the defensive driving courses that are offered to high schools, and at a meagre fee of $25, she was able to take that on board. But most of all, we're grateful for the slow vehicle bay that allowed her to take evasive action and avoid a plunge into the harbour or a head-on collision. And then I remember the article in the paper, and it was accompanied by a photo, and it was Chris, who I met on the Otago Girls High School PTSA. So I gave Chris a call and I told her of my story because I suddenly thought of her daughter Beth, who very shortly will be learning to drive and driving that road on a daily basis. And so Chris encouraged me to put pen to paper, which I've never done before, let alone think about coming and speaking to you all here, as you can tell from the nervousness in my voice. But so it all did become real. And so for the sake of all the motorists, but especially our younger drivers, I do ask you to speed up this project and widen the road. Widen it enough so that when a motorist is faced with a split-second decision, when a car is coming around the corner on the wrong side of the road, that the result isn't fatal. Swerving and pulling over are far better options than the other two that my daughter had to think about, or might have had to think about, had she been a few metres further up the road. The outcome for us as a family could have been so different had it not been for that extra road width that gave Madeline the option to pull over. So I ask you that you make sure that there's an option for all drivers along that Peninsula Road.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions, councillors? No? That was very clear submission. Thank you.
Thank you.
Simon Rhodes. No, not here. Michael Broughton. Welcome, Michael.
How do you open it? I'm trying to open it.
You have to use that.
Right, just run the show. What do I click to make it go?
this, if you
Sorry?
point the arrows,
Right.
point them up at the machine.
Oh, okay.
Just check that's turned on.
Right, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Michael Broughton. I'm a member of the Dunedin Astronomical Society and also of the Royal Astronomical Society of New Zealand. The subject of my submission today is the LED street lighting that's been proposed for Dunedin in 2016. We've all heard about, or some of us heard about, the plans for making Dunedin a dark sky city. I think it's absolutely a fabulous idea, naturally enough. It obviously has huge economic potential. I've just come from the Rasmus conference in Tekapo. It's a booming city now from the tourism benefits. Of course, they have a fantastic night sky, one of the best in the world. But I should say that I think with the appropriate lighting here in Dunedin, we could actually achieve a similar result. We could become Dunedin's first dark sky city. And I'd like to present a proposal here. I think there's a few things that we need to do in order to achieve that. So I've set out what I think are a few criteria for achieving that goal. The first is that people can enjoy the night sky without interference from outdoor lighting. I mean, that is absolutely critical. At the moment, our street lights that we presently have are very light polluting. They scatter a lot of light, they waste energy. A lot of that light is scattered upwards, which you might gather when you see on a cloudy night, you see the orange glow in the night sky. All that is wasted light and essentially is wasteful of energy as well. The second criteria would be, obviously, if you had that, could achieve that, the Milky Way, the Magellanic Clouds and the Aurora, which you may have been heard about from Ian Griffin with some of the pictures in the newspaper, they'd all be visible, clearly visible from all of Dunedin, not just going out to remote sites, but anywhere in the city. Now that's a pretty lofty goal. That won't be achieved overnight, but I believe that if you do the job well, that is a potential. And the last, now this may sound a little strange, but you've heard a little bit from Steve Butler earlier, that public and private lighting is healthy for people and it's safe for the environment. That's the land and marine environment. And you've already sort of had some inkling that lighting isn't necessarily healthy for you and used improperly. So as you can see from this diagram, our night sky at present is polluted with light. We have much the same lighting actually as everywhere else. And if you want to be able to call yourself a dark sky city, then we need to somehow differentiate ourselves from other cities, just like Tekapo has done. So we need darkness as much as we do light. As Steve said, humans have evolved under a day-night cycle. Our bodies need the night to rest and repair damage and to fight infection and disease. For those people who have light shining into their bedrooms at night, you are shortchanged of this benefit. Now specifically, it's the blue component of light that convinces our bodies that it's still daytime and delays the release of hormones that produce the benefits of rest. It affects our physiology. What happens is the blue component of white light signals to our bodies when to awaken and its absence when to sleep. What it does is it inhibits melatonin production. This is a special hormone and it disrupts what we call our circadian rhythm, which I hope most of you have heard about. Some hormones, like human growth hormone, for example, are only made in darkness. And hormone suppression is also implicated in a number of diseases. We're discovering that it's implicated in cancer, diabetes, depression, and there's actually others being discovered all the time. This shows an example of different kinds of lighting that you could use. The least light polluting of all is low pressure sodium. That's the top one. That's the type of lighting they have in Tekapo. And it's a kind of lighting actually you would want to aspire to if you want to call yourself a dark sky city. But the future is LEDs. This is what we're here because they're efficient, they don't waste energy, and they last a very long time. Therefore, the choice of that LED is actually vital. If you want to have a dark sky city, you've got to choose that very carefully. As you can see, there's a variety of LEDs that are available. The one that's been considered for Dunedin is the second from the bottom, the 4100 Kelvin LED. You can see that contains a significant component of blue light. Now that is something like roughly 3 times more light polluting than the high pressure sodium we have now. Now if you look at the second table here, we've got what we call the melatonin suppression. You can see that the 4100 Kelvin LED is something like 4 times the melatonin suppression of what we currently have now. So there are, just from that I hope you can realise there are significant health implications of that. If you have the misfortune to be below an LED street light and you aren't screened from it and you don't know about it, there are potential health implications. So what about these LEDs? I've just alluded to, they're very efficient, they're long lasting, they are strongly light polluting, 3 times more than our current high pressure sodium. Health and environmental consequences. The human vision is actually relatively insensitive to blue light, so it doesn't make sense to me to have blue light in a lighting that actually you don't see very well. Also, there's a problem with glare. I don't know how many of you actually looked at these LED street lights. They're in Vogel Street, but if you go down and have a look at them, they are simply dazzling. They dazzle the eyes. Everyone have spoken to has said this. My elderly aunt went down there and she didn't like them at all. She said they weren't warm or friendly. So what do we need to do to qualify as a dark sky city? We need to differentiate ourselves from other cities in our use of lighting. I think we should avoid the exclusive use of these white LEDs. It's the yellow light which is warm and friendly. The white light I find cold and impersonal. The filtered LEDs have about half that sky glow and only 1/6 of the melatonin suppression of the white LEDs. Amber LEDs are available and they're similar to our high and low pressure sodium, and they are the least light polluting at all. So I think in environmental areas such as down at the albatross colony or anywhere where there's for example, the peripatus, the velvet worm you might have heard of, that's a unique creature, special to Dunedin. How is that going to affect that creature? You have to ask yourself these questions. So what is the minimum lighting prescription? Now, this is from an international group of experts for the protection of the night sky. First, don't allow luminaires, that's the housing of the lamp, don't allow them to send any light out above the horizontal. Don't waste downward light flux outside the area to be lit. In other words, only light the area that you intend to light and nothing else. I understand the lighting proposal we have for Dunedin actually does have full cut-off downward pointing luminaires. The problem I have with is the LED. Avoid overlighting. So only light what you actually really need to light. Do we really want to light up our sky and make night into day? Do you really want that? Lower levels of road lighting substantially. It actually turns out, research is showing that the human eye is a remarkably adaptable organ, part of the body. It can actually adapt, if you give it a chance, to much, much lower lighting levels. You don't need to have intense, dazzling white light. You can actually, they've done studies to show that people can quite aware of cars and pedestrians at much lower lighting levels, even half the light flux that they have today. Shut-off lights in the area were not in use, we've covered that. Aim for a decrease in the total installed flux. That means the total amount of light output. Just as you do with other pollutants, over time you want to lower the amount of polluting material. And this last is the most point which I really want to work on, strongly limit the short wavelength blue light. That light, we have evidence accumulating now that it's harmful to people, it's harmful to animals and plants. We have special, as Steve Butler mentioned earlier, we have receptors in the eye which specifically respond to blue light. They are our cues for when to go to sleep. If this also applies for you in your homes, if you have computer screens and phones and things like that, or TV, and you're looking at this late at night which has a blue light component, that will delay your sleep significantly. So finally, this is the recommendations of the Dunedin Dark Skies group, which I'm the convener of. Fully shield all your lighting, preferably full cut-off downward pointing. Colour is very important. Use amber or filtered or warm LEDs. Shut off lights or dim them whenever possible. Identify and protect your dark sky sites. Now, Dunedin is particularly blessed. We have fantastic resources just on our back doorstep. There aren't many cities in the world where you can see the aurora. You can go out, you can get Aurora alerts and apps for your phone, and you can just go over to places like Tunnel Beach or out to Hooper's Inlet, and you can see these things, which is actually a fantastic thing to the city to be promoting itself as Aurora capital, if you like, of New Zealand, even though Invercargill gets them as well. What am I going to say here? One other thing, educate the public. How many people actually realise that actually blue light has health consequences? I have tried to develop a project here called Milky Way of Dunedin, a dark sky city. Now in this project I'm trying to get rolled out to schools, and the whole aim of this project is to get children, raise their awareness of light pollution, try to get young people involved in realising that the night sky is a precious asset and it's something we ought to be looking after. Going just down that list a bit further, I think we need to, just like Tekapo, if you want, ultimately it's about education as the primary thing I want to drive home. You need to educate the public. But also I think eventually you need to back this up with rules, just like they have in Tekapo. They have lighting ordinances in place, so they actually can control the type of lighting that's put in the community. We'll have other members of our group tell you that one of the big problems overseas is not so much the public lighting like you have, but it's private lighting. It's lighting coming from businesses. And because these LEDs are becoming pretty cheap, what's happening is that you're getting a flood of these cheap white LEDs. The light pollution, if anything, is becoming worse in those places. So that's something you need to think about. Also our sporting facilities. How many of you have seen Forbury Raceway lit up at night? And there's the hockey fields I'm aware of as well. They're only on for short lengths of time, comparatively short lengths of time, but I think, they should be encouraged at least to consider the lighting, how they light those facilities in the future. Maybe choose a different colour lighting, maybe an amber lighting, and maybe make that more directional. So a summary then. Amber and filtered LEDs are healthy, dark sky friendly. By emitting the blue light, they mitigate melatonin suppression, they minimise light pollution and sky glow. So then Dunedin may rightfully claim to be a dark sky city with the tourism benefits. Why? Save the night sky, save the Kiwi. Thanks to C. Butler for that. That's Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Questions, Councillor Wiley?
Michael, what's the cost difference between the lights, like for the full LED 5100 versus the amber or?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information, but your roading engineer, Peter Standring, will. And in fact, Peter Standring has been talking with one of our members of our group, Dr. Alexander Tups, who's a biologist whose field just happens to be the suppression of melatonin. So we're pretty lucky in Dunedin having a specialist in that area. And my understanding is that all LEDs, compared with the current lighting, are efficient. Yes, there'll be some cost differences, but if you weigh that up against or balance that against the benefits that you might gain and also mitigating harm, then I understand Peter Standring would be willing to look at the filtered LED as an option.
Okay. And we're working through a 10-year plan. How quickly would you like to see this implemented? And not like tomorrow, but like realistically, is it 3 years, 5 years?
Well, I think given that our Dunedin has now lived for years with the high pressure sodium, I don't see there's any immediate rush. But I think what I would like to see is perhaps some of these LEDs or examples of them rolled out in an area like the Octagon, where people can actually see them and make an informed choice. And also I'd like to see people being given the pros and cons of the different kinds of lighting that are available. I mean, one thing that Peter Standring, you probably won't like me saying this, but he was very helpful to us in understanding in that he actually shielded the street lights round the Beverley Beag Observatory, where I'm a member. And that made a huge difference, just that simple shielding of the lighting. In fact, that's the simplest thing you could possibly do in the meantime, is simply put up some simple shielding around the existing lighting, and it made a dramatic difference, where you could all immediately see more stars for a start, but also we could see the road more clearly. It was actually easier to see the road. It was easier to, without the glare of the light shining in your eyes, you could actually have better definition.
And then with the type of hood or cone over the light, is there a way to increase the exposure from that light, like by coating or something like that?
Sorry, I don't understand.
So if you, for example, if you put a mirror inside the, or some sort of reflective surface inside a hood or over a light, will it project more light out?
I'm sorry, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that. I think you'd better ask Peter Standring that question. From what I could observe, at least of the shielding around the Beverley Beg, and in fact if you go up Ross Street you can see that for yourself, there are only a handful of lights that have been shielded. But if you, for example, stand in Robin Hood Park, you can immediately see that you can still see the road perfectly well. But what we noticed was that we could, without having that glare of the light shining straight into our eyes, we were able to see the other things better. I don't believe you need reflectors inside them. All they did was simply put up some shielding so that you don't merely have the problem is just like you have when the headlights, you're driving along at night and you have a approaching car coming towards you with headlights, especially on full beam, you get that glare in your eyes and you find that difficult to see. As soon as you can shield that and take it away, it becomes, your vision becomes that much better. It's easier to see things.
Do you know anything, or does the melatonin person might be a better person to ask about older eyes compared with younger eyes? Because there's some suggestion out now that older eyes need more light. That 10% more light in a dementia unit makes them 10% smarter or whatever.
Well, I haven't heard about them. I can't say about people. I know much about people with dementia needing more light, but what I can say is that glare in general is a well-known problem, and the problem with human eyes, especially as you age, and Dunedin has an ageing population, is that glare becomes more troublesome as you get older. And the reason for that is that your lens yellows with age, and also it becomes more opaque. And so glare, when you have light shining into your face, actually becomes an increasing problem. And that's one of the things I noticed with the new LED streetlights. If you go down to Vogel Street, I mean, not that you're going to look up at them all the time, but they are dazzling. There's no question about them. I'm just wondering how well they would perform on a wet road surface, for example, when you have that light reflected off the road. What is going to happen then? And, and the other point I made in my submission is Dunedin's obviously is a hilly city. So that means some of you, despite the shielding, are going to be below the level of those lights. They'll be shining, and I know a friend in Christchurch has this problem, they shine directly into your bedroom. If you are unaware then of the potential health problems that the blue light component can disrupt the circadian rhythm, disrupt your sleep, that's going to make for a lot of sleep-deprived people, potentially. So I think that's why I think if you're going to go ahead with this type of lighting, you're going to need to study this. In fact, one of the things I would like to say is that I've engaged Professor Brian, what's his name? Brian, I've forgotten his name now, it's in my submission, of the preventive and social, he's the Associate Professor of Environmental Medicine in the University of Otago. And he is, in fact, I've got a letter here which is amongst my submission that he is willing to look into, along with Dr. Alexander Tups, into potential health effects on the Dunedin's population when we install these lights. And they recognise it as a potential health issue. It's quite a well-known phenomenon.
In terms of the lighting of a city, do you think it would be possible, like you've talked about around the Beverley Beg Observatory, having the shielding has improved it significantly?
Yes, it has.
Would you advocate a mixed use of LED lighting if the costs are significant? In other words, where you would use a warm or an amber LED versus a filtered LED versus a white LED?
I think that is an entirely reasonable suggestion. I'm not saying blanketly that we should just have necessarily one type of LED, and I think that would actually make for a more vibrant and exciting city to live in. I mean, I think, for example, in the central business district, you could adopt these 4,100 Kelvin LEDs that they have now, because the thing is, if you want to keep especially want to keep patrons awake, you know, you might want to go for.
I think we better go for amber.
you might want to go for the blue-white sort of lighting. But I certainly think in the suburbs where people live, I would definitely advocate for a much warmer LED, definitely. You know, there's no point keeping the whole population awake, but I certainly think it's a matter of canvassing the people in the central business district and asking them what is it they want. And I think it would be particularly useful to actually see different types of LED lighting installed in, say, the Octagon, so people could actually see it and decide for themselves what it is that would suit their community.
The other one is there any sort of topographical effect as well? So, for instance, in the city we have areas that are more open to the night sky, if you like. So there's enclosed valleys, or more or less enclosed valleys, and there's open areas. Is it worth mapping the city to decide where the areas that would have the most significant effect on night sky?
Absolutely. I mean, we are particularly lucky. It's in the sense that despite everything I've said about the amount of light pollution, because of relatively small size, we're very fortunate that you can drive out to places like Tunnel Beach, for example, to see the aurora, or you can drive out to Blackhead, or you can go out to Hooper's Inlet. And I think it would be very important for the city to survey and protect these sites and identify these sites as sites of special significance, that these are the areas where people go to, and astrophotographers like Dr. Ian Griffin, for example, go to these areas. I mean, I think of some concern is when you have developers coming into a new area and then suddenly wanting to install lighting. I mean, we're very fortunate, for example, out at Tunnel Beach, there's a whole lot of new housing development, but no one there is clamouring for the lighting, thank goodness. I mean, I think one of the arguments you'll get people raise is the question also of security. You know, we need lighting for security. Lights make you more secure at night. Actually, that evidence is actually quite equivocal. There's arguments for and against that. I mean, you might want to think, well, what do you do in your own home when you go to bed? You turn the lights off, don't you? Do you feel less secure because you've got the lights off? What I would advocate for is the use of lighting which has sensors in the lighting, so that if a person walks down the street and it's dark, you can turn the sensor on. And I think we'd also advocate, which Peter Standring is amenable to as well, is actually turning the lights off at a certain time of the night. I mean, you don't need them going all day long. And another problem that I've noticed is I live in Caversham, and the area where I live, there's a park called Kew Park. And they meant well at the time, but the people there got a grant to put in playgrounds and things like that, which is great. But what they've also done is the whole park is illuminated at night like a blazing beacon. I mean, you know, no one. I've walked my dog through there, and I've yet to see people playing a game of tennis or soccer or whatever it is at night time. So it just doesn't make sense to me to be floodlighting the place. And I think that's one thing I've also made in my submission. I think you should look at your parks and reserves and areas and say, well, is it really? Do you really need to be illuminating that all night long? Is that something that you require? I mean, certainly it's a pathway. You need to have some lighting, but is it something that you need to floodlight the whole area with?
Thank you.
Michael, thank you for your submission.
Thank you.
Very interesting, very illuminating.
Ironically, that's the title of this talk. I've actually got copies of all these articles, so if you want to read them, there's 20 copies of all of these.
Yep.
And incidentally, there's many published articles on linking lighting with disease. That's just but one of them.
Yep.
Yes, in a sense.
Alistair Child. Welcome, Alistair.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Please bear with me. I've never done this before.
That's fine, no problem.
My name's Alistair Child. I live in Wharfdale Street in Macandrew Bay with my partner Marion, and I've been there for 2.5 years. We live directly above the community hall and get to see pretty much everything that happens there. Firstly, congratulations to the council for the work they've done in Macandrew Bay, the beach, the parking areas, just the whole general place, the gardens. It's a great asset and it's well used. However, the dual footpath bikeway is a shambles and is not and never will be user-friendly to anybody. I wonder who did who and why did somebody change the perfectly good walkway that was there when we first came here to a dual bike walking lane that wasn't needed, and in my opinion, and introduced all sorts of problems. Also, the cost of the council, which passed this cost on to ratepayers, no doubt, is why so much money was spent creating a bike lane. It was not going to be used. Bikes on the bike lane have to obey, bikes on the bike lane, which is part of the road, they have to obey the road rules as normal. But the moment they go onto the footpath, they can do what they like, and they do what they like. The road racing bikes almost never use the walkway. They stay on the road, biking pretty quickly. It seems to work for them pretty well. We also see a smaller number of track bikes using the bike lane, the current bike lane. But we seem to be pandering to a small and aggressive bunch of bikers who will bike through a group of people at up to 30 k's. By people, I mean mums, dads, grannies, babies in prams, dogs on leads, children on scooters, small bikes, and me marching along, listening to my music on my iPad. Someone said to me I should be out not doing that and looking out behind me, etc. And I say, why should I? I'm on a walkway. I shouldn't have to worry about some clod on a bike racing up behind me. Another person said to me, the bike is to use a bell. This was tried in Wanaka and didn't work. It also gives people a fright. They don't know which way to jump. 50-50 chance that you're going to go the wrong way. Also, what if you're deaf? It doesn't work. About a month ago, I spoke to a learned gentleman from the Bay, whom you might know, Brendan Nielsen, JP, about this problem. He said sadly he had to stop using or walking on or across that bikeway. He feared for having to move too quickly and having a fall. So he doesn't use it anymore. He also talked about the cost of creating it. To this end, I end my rant and rave about this, but I had one little thought the other day just crossed my mind. This is in jest. Based on the model of the council has done in Macandrew Bay, why not apply this logic to the CDB? That way we could have do away with bike lanes on the roads. Wouldn't that be great? Not having to worry about bikes on the roads. Thanks for listening to me.
Thanks, Alistair. Can you just clarify where you're talking about specifically?
The Macandrew Bay area, north and south.
Yes.
And other areas being developed right now. But my main concern is that area is probably one of the most walked tracks areas.
Oh, well, right, okay. Well, that area I bike quite a lot, and the walkway is the walkway and there's a cycleway on the road. They're not the same. So
they are. Well, on the McAndrew Bay, they have signage for bikes and people to go on what is the footpath or bike or walkway. And I can't remember the street names from one end to the other end, but if you have a look, it's here.
There's a cycleway on the road.
Yes, there is, and right beside it, there's another cycleway and includes walkway sign.
Well, maybe there is, but it's not what it's meant to be. But I can assure you that when the cycleway right through Portobello Road is developed, the configuration is going to change in any case, so that the pedestrian way will be separate from the cyclist, as I thought was and have thought was all along.
Yeah, it's only the signage that's changed. Yeah, and easy change back again, in my opinion. I asked why was it done in the first place? Nobody seems to know.
Councillor Peake.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. I'm familiar with, like the Mayor, with this area, and I do see bikes on the footpath, as you call it, and they are mostly just youngsters riding to school or back from school. But you're talking about a different category of rider, aren't you?
I'm talking about all age people, old enough to, I have no problem with children on bikes. If it's deemed dangerous, they can go on the footpath, and their parents will say, ride on the footpath, and that's fine. And those people, in my opinion, are aware of people like me, and they, excuse me, and they go around us, and there's no high-speed manoeuvring. But and those ones that are going to school, they're fine. They're not an issue. It's these mostly men pumping their way down there, flying past him. But there's a whole line of abuse passes out of the person that got the fright, usually from the fright, but that's just to somebody's back that's disappearing in the distance.
So they're recreational cyclists who are going long distance, are they?
Yes, they mostly are recreational. I see a few men that I recognise who bike right up to Dunedin every day, and they always stay on the road or on the road bike lane. Never ever do they go onto the footpath. So it's easy fix, but it would be good to take note in future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.